Hello and welcome to the Actual Tech Media Ecocast. Today's topic, tool time, the tools that supercharge a Microsoft on-premises or cloud environment. Thank you so much for joining us on the Ecocast. We've got a great event lined up for you. On this event, you'll hear from experts at Druva, Red Hat, Gigamon, Thycotic, NetApp, and Nutanix, some of the most innovative companies in the space today. If you haven't been on an Ecocast before, you should know that we at Actual Tech Media created the Ecocast and Megacast event series to help educate IT professionals about the latest and greatest in enterprise technology, to help you do it without ever having to leave the comfort of your home or home office, to help you solve your IT challenges, get all your questions answered, and have a lot of fun, maybe even win some prizes too. We're all former IT professionals here at Actual Tech Media, and we know how tough it can be in the trenches of IT, so we want to help to solve your technology challenges here on the Ecocast. Before we get started, just a few things that you should know about the event. We do have some awesome prizes. I'll talk about those in just a moment. We also have some poll questions for you during the event, but at the same time, we encourage you to use the questions panel there in your audience console. We'll be doing dedicated Q&A sessions with each of today's expert presenters, and we need your questions. We even have a best question prize to help encourage those questions. I'll talk about that in just a moment. We want this to be a social event. We encourage you to use the Twitter icon on your screen where you can tweet directly from your console, and the hashtag for the event today will be automatically appended. We also have some awesome resources there in your handouts tab. Make sure that you download those, click on those links, because those resources won't be as readily available after the event. Prizes for today are 3 Amazon $500 gift cards. You must be live in attendance to qualify. The winners will be announced by me, the moderator, throughout the event. And we also have our $50 Amazon Best Question prizes. These are for 6 Amazon $50 gift cards. We've got 6 presentations, so it's 1 Amazon $50 gift card for each session on the event today. Again, the goal of this is to help encourage your questions. If you have a question on your mind, make sure that you ask it to help solve your problem, and hey, also give you a chance to maybe win a gift card. All prize winners must be able to submit an IRS Form W-9 to Actual Tech Media to collect your prize winnings. We'll reach out to the prize winners via email after the event. All prize winners have the option to make a donation to selected charities. You can find the full prize terms and conditions there in the handouts tab. Over the years, generous prize winners have made donations for their prize values to the selected charities you see here on the screen, and we've donated thousands of dollars, so thank you in advance if you should choose to do that. We've done this in partnership with the Gorilla Guide Book Club at gorilla.guide. Make sure that you check them out for free educational IT books. These are all written by Actual Tech Media expert authors, completely free, by the way, so make sure that you download those. You can find a link to the Gorilla Guide Book Club there in your handouts tab. The hashtag for today on Twitter is ATM Ecocast. We'd love to see you tweeting about what you learn on the event. You can follow Actual Tech Media and me, David M. Davis, on Twitter as well. Subscribe to all the Actual Tech Media social channels as well on YouTube, Facebook, and the 10 on Tech podcast, as well as our latest and greatest content that we post over on LinkedIn. So make sure that you follow us there. You can do that right now on the top right-hand side of your audience console. So before we get started with today's expert presenters and a few poll questions, I want to talk for a moment about supercharging your Microsoft on-premises IT infrastructure. The world of IT is always challenging. There's always too much to do, too many problems to solve, not enough time, not enough resources to do it. We've got complex IT infrastructures that always seem like they need constant care and feeding. So what we need, in my opinion, are some really efficient, really innovative solutions to help make us the superheroes of IT, to help us to boost our efficiency, to do more with less. That saying that we just can't stand, but if we had the right technology, the right smart software, it is possible. If we could reduce complexity in our IT environments, that would allow us to do more and also improve our scalability, our availability, and the performance for our critical applications. It would allow us to offer new services or streamline our existing services. That's what we need to be doing for the business, not just upgrading firmware or fixing printers or resizing LUNs. We need to be providing faster, better, more intelligent applications for our business, and maybe even, hey, saving money in the IT infrastructure. Money that could be spent on additional people to help us out, or new applications or software that makes our lives more efficient. Maybe if we had less complexity, we could even reduce or refocus our staff on these projects that can really make a difference for the company. And sometimes it's simply a case of reducing the need for so many tools. I know some of us have tool sprawl out there where we might have 6 different monitoring solutions, or 4 different troubleshooting tools, or 5 different brands of storage that are all managed differently. So it's my opinion that really smart tools can help us as IT professionals to do our jobs better. So when you're looking for new tools, make sure that you look for solutions where you can try before you buy, do a proof of concept, really understand the tool that you're considering before you implement it. Support is also important. You're going to need support along the way. As much as we like to think of ourselves as the superheroes of technology, at some point, you might have to actually call support. You'll want to learn from other customers who have implemented the same solution, look at case studies, talk to customer references, and also keep in mind that no solution out there is an island. Solutions need to integrate with existing solutions in your data center and other solutions that you might be considering, the entire ecosystem of the data center. So if you keep all that in mind, I think we've got a great event lined up for you where you'll learn about some of these tools that can help you to boost your efficiency, scalability, availability, performance, reduce complexity, and do more with less. I'm excited to hear from our experts at Druva, Red Hat, Gigamon, Thycotic, NetApp, and Nutanix. Now, before I introduce you to our first expert presenter, I've got a few poll questions for you.
All right, I've just brought up our first poll question on the screen that says, which of these are you most concerned with in the next 12 months? And I want to hear your feedback on this. I mean, in my presentation, I talked a lot about, the challenges that IT professionals are facing, but you guys and gals or IT professionals, I want to hear what your real world challenges are. And I'll share the results of this poll with you. And this is the first of 3 polls here before I introduce you to our first presenter. If you haven't responded to one of these polls before, you just do it right there in the slides window. Just click the option, or in this case, probably multiple options that correspond to you and your company. I'm sure this is one of those polls where you don't have just one challenge. You always have more than one challenge. So I'll give you a moment to respond to that and then share the results. In the meantime, I'll respond to everyone out there who's saying hello and good morning. I see Adam, Christopher, Brad, Jason, Martin, Patricia, Brooke, Kevin, so many folks, hundreds of IT professionals across the United States and around the world. So thank you for all the good morning and hello messages. We do appreciate those. It's great to hear how everyone's doing, and it's great to have you on the Ecocast. Let me share the results of this poll with you now. And it looks like 55% said ransomware protection and recovery. No surprise there. 51% said preventing security breaches. And then it's a relative tie, I would say, across many of the other challenges here, all in the 20% range, roughly. Data management, retaining and hiring staff, visualization, monitoring, troubleshooting, justifying IT budgets, and cloud migration, application modernization. There were 6% of you out there who said you had a concern that wasn't on the list. I encourage you to just drop it there in the questions panel, and I will share your feedback with the audience. We do appreciate that, and it helps me to improve the poll for next time as well. If there's challenges that you're experiencing that simply weren't on the list, I want to hear about it. In the meantime, I'll move on to our second of 3 polls, and that is, who is your primary cloud provider for your Microsoft environment? Azure, Google, AWS, or some other cloud provider. We're going to talk a lot on the Ecocast today about on-premises cloud and public cloud and the integration between the two, to create hybrid cloud. And, in many cases, companies are looking at or implementing multi-cloud solutions as well. But just curious here, who is your primary cloud provider when it comes to running Microsoft-oriented workloads? I like this feedback from Matthew, who said that their biggest concern is just how to resist the migration to the cloud. I've heard that from other IT pros as well, and I guess my advice there probably is to just leverage cloud where it makes sense. It's not a all or nothing solution, and you can use it where it makes sense here and there for your company. In fact, we had a great event yesterday, in fact, a webinar where the presenter was talking about companies who have this cloud-first strategy and how it doesn't really make sense a lot of times to just blatantly say, we're going to put everything in the cloud. Analyze it on a case-by-case basis. So great feedback. Thank you for that, and thank you to everyone who responded there to the poll question. Let me share the results of this one as well. And I think it's probably no big surprise for Microsoft workloads that 54% said Azure is their primary cloud, followed by 22% that said AWS, and 14% said another cloud. Interesting. So thank you for that. And then final poll question here before I introduce you to our first presenter coming up. That is, what's your time frame for adding new or updating IT solutions at your company? The types of solutions and tools that we're talking about on today's Ecocast. Is this something you are immediately looking to do? Make some changes here, maybe improve your data protection, strengthen your storage, improve your network monitoring or visualization. No matter what the solution, just looking here for the time frame. Thank you, everyone who responded there to our series of poll questions. We do appreciate that. It's time now to kick off our Tool Time Ecocast with our first presenter. I'm excited now to introduce Vanessa Toves, a solutions architect for Microsoft 365 at Druva. Vanessa, it's great to have you on. I'll hand it off to you. Take it away.
Thank you, everyone. And let me get going here. So today we're going to be talking about how to protect your information in 365. My name is Vanessa Toves. I am by trade a solution architect for Microsoft, not directly for Microsoft, but I've dedicated my career to Microsoft technologies. And what that means is since the very first versions of server-based Sharepoint and their business intelligence enterprise platforms and all up into the cloud, into 365, I've worked with companies of all sizes and across industry to help them adopt those technologies, right? How do I use these technologies? And I really enjoyed that. But when things started moving into the cloud, and the adoption was a little slower, especially for corporate America. But what started happening was this messaging started to really stick with some corporations about protecting your 365 information, right? And I think back to, it's like not a question even today that companies protect what's behind the firewall, right? They're protecting their servers and their databases and everything else. But for some reason, now moving into the cloud, there's less of that. So 365, it's more secure or more reliable today than it was a year ago, than it was 5 years ago. And there's purposes for things like a recycle bin. Not everything is in the recycle bin. Using retention has a very specific purpose in the ecosystem of 365. So the message is misleading. And it's misleading very much so because of what our customers are coming to us. Right? They're not necessarily coming to us and saying, hey, can you back up a file? Right? They're talking about their critical business issues that they're facing today, whether that issue is controlling the cost of the storage in 365, or what do I do, right? We have to retain our employees for even exiting employees for 7 years. Whatever those critical business issues are, those are the things that basically make this messaging incorrect. Right? You must protect your 365 content, just as if it were behind your own firewall. Now, once you're in there, the threats that you're facing are different than you faced, right? Than companies faced before. Companies today that are still using on-premise versions, right? Compromised credentials, compromised endpoints, cyber attacks, and I have had to that, right? Users with access, whether it's authorized or not. And depending on what you've solved, right? What business problems have you solved? Are you solving today, and what do you plan to solve? That adoption of 365 and all of these apps and services equates to exposure over time. And then there's this slither of information that's in all throughout the entire tenant that's sensitive, right? And this number of 17.4%, when I first saw this, I think it was pretty close to what I kind of felt companies were doing, right? They were moving sensitive information, employee information, right, vendor information, customer information, and they were using SharePoint and using Teams and of course in their email. So that threat, it's not about just that you have threats, but what are you trying to protect against, right? You're trying to protect your information from being compromised. So for the customers that we have, this is one of the places that they go, right? This is one of the places that they can be reassured that their employees are getting backed up, that they're keeping their backups for the last 7 years, that their SharePoint, their Teams, their public folders, right? This is where they start and can ensure that they're being covered where that's concerned. Right? They start with InSync by Druva. Now, I recently supported the Microsoft Ignite conference, and in one of the security sessions, there was a poll about, what's on your mind. And ransomware was 60%, right? 60% of the people there. So it's there. It's on everyone's mind. But it's not necessarily just about ransomware where we're experiencing loss, and then we have to kind of protect against that. It's also admins, users, what do we do with our exiting employees' information? And to some extent also, right, Microsoft's actual development life cycle as well. Now, as we talk about what we're protecting, right, we go back to these critical business issues that companies face. It's not just about the backup, right? It's not about backup a file, backup an email, or restore a file, restore an email. Organizations need the ability to restore the process. See, that's what people are doing with 365 today, right? They're replacing manual processes. They're driving standards. This is where you go for your employee engagement. This is where you go. They're identifying these areas all throughout, and they're doing 365 in a number of ways, right? To save time, to save money, to stay in compliance. And compliance existed well before 365 did. And it will continue to exist regardless of what platform you're in. So, and there's also internal compliance that companies use all these apps, the various apps within 365. So when we talk about what we're protecting against and what we have to be able to cover, we're not just recovering a file, we're recovering the process. For how to be able to answer the question, how to get the appraisers back the files so the process can continue. Not so they can have that necessarily just to a particular email. Now, how is that the administration can be a threat or an issue? Depending on your size of the company and the investment also made with your support staff, right, you can have a ratio of like 45-70 to 1. I've worked with companies where they've had 500 to 1,000 to 1,500 to 1. Right, and these admins that we have today, our admins are not just 365 admins, they're all Okta admins, Jira admins. So they're being spread out across all of these cloud-based applications. And meanwhile, 365 itself, the administration of it is very wide and it's very deep. So the policies that you find all throughout there can do one thing. It can affect content. So I can understand how this person wiped out the chat of 145,000 users. It happens, and it could have very well happened. He got a ticket, Maybe the person knew or didn't know what was in the other side of that button. But what they did was they applied policy that wiped out the chat for a group that they didn't mean to wipe it out. There's no recovery from that. I can't recover from that point. Right, so the use of allowing too many global admins in your organization, I've seen that over and over. Right, utilize the role-based administration and try and help mitigate, try and help control where these admins have the ability to affect content that they didn't curate. Right? Now, throughout 365, there's all these apps and there's use cases where the recycle bin has no bearing, right? Bears no weight in terms of being able to get something back. Retention is not going to help, and the platform is up and running. So you can look to your own ticketing system and find that there's some common things that you're not able to be able to support. I can't restore something. I can't restore the site permissions or the site settings as it was yesterday, right? Let alone a week ago or ago. Microsoft or any application makes something easier, users will use it. So creating a column, they're tagging their content, right? They're doing that so that they can move something maybe through a process, but they can also mass update a column and the values in there affecting their content. They can also delete this column on accident because it's very easy to do. So these things you cannot recover from. The move function in 365 or in SharePoint and OneDrive, the function works. There's nothing wrong with it. But the problem is when the user doesn't realize that that folder that they selected has 10,000 files, 400 folders, and 24 gigabytes of information. And they open up a ticket that sounds something like this. Hey, half my information is over here, and I think the other half is over here. Help. Right, all of these scenarios where the recycle bin's not going to help you, that you can't recover from them. And as a solution architect, I've designed solutions for HR or finance or anything that actually has a security model in place. For HR employee files, it was something like, I want 2 people to see everything, 3 people to see the active files, 4 people to see the terminated. Right, so these sites in your 365, they're being created and you're applying a security model in some areas that you have no ability to restore, right? I used to have access to this yesterday, I don't. Or I can see this now where I wasn't able to see this before. Something happened and, a year can go by and you need to be able to restore what was put in place, right? That architecture that was there for these areas. So all of these use cases, I just picked 4 and you'll find them all throughout 365 because that's kind of the nature of what's happening. It's such a big behemoth, right, platform. Now, why do I bring up the development lifecycle? With 45,000, maybe 50,000 engineers today, right? They're constantly rolling out fixes. They're creating new features, right? They're identifying that there's loss they're trying to address any kind of potential loss already. Now, it's the new features, though, that can have an impact for our company. Right? If you don't have your eyes on things, you're going to find that the employees begin to back up their desktops, right? Back up my desktop, my documents, my pictures up into my OneDrive. And I'd say when we're talking about this backup, that stuff goes up into your individual's OneDrive. Now, OneDrive is 2 things. It's a storage area for my stuff. It's also a sync technology that's used for OneDrive and SharePoint, and that brings a folder down into your file explorer. Right? So when I would use this or when I would show people this, you'd find that probably maybe 5% of a company was using the OneDrive sync. So now when organizations see this awesome feature that was just rolled out, what they're not realizing is there's some major implications that come with this backup. Right, backing up my desktop. And the first thing being, you're bringing this down now. Remember, all of that 17.4% that we talked about before, now that we're backing up our desktop, that number has increased. We've got more information that is now in my OneDrive. And now, with compromised credentials, compromised endpoints, and cyber attacks, those pointers to the SharePoint files, to things that are highly sensitive, are right there. Someone doesn't have to go and navigate to try and figure out where these employee files are, right? It's there on the desktop. So this ransomware has the ability to delete, modify, or encrypt these files that are right there. So there's a lot of potential impacts when these new features come out and you don't necessarily have the ability to support it or understand what's happening, right? Understand what the long-term implications are of turning this on for a company of 1,000 employees. Now, OneDrive itself as a backup, I think it's good that Microsoft did something, but when we're talking about an enterprise backup, right, a company's ability to restore their enterprise, restore from anywhere, restore more than just 1 or 2 or 3 people. Right? That is one of the differences, one of the core differences is the level in which it supports the entire organization. So if you need to restore, a person can absolutely restore their OneDrive back to sometime within the last 30 days. But when we're doing legal or e-discovery, when we're supporting a legal case, we're not talking about, you know, the attorneys aren't asking for things that just happened yesterday. They're asking for things that happened 6 months ago or a year ago. So if this information is deleted and gone, there's no way of getting that back. And that's why we talk about, right, OneDrive backup is not an enterprise-ready backup solution for an organization. So we've talked about all these things about just the areas where information within 365, where 365 you have to protect this. Now we'll just talk a little bit about how Druva can protect your 365 content. Now it starts with your tenant, and we connect with your Azure AD. We also interact with your content within 365, and we do so with the API services. And we utilize and connect to your Azure AD. And then there's our Druva Cloud platform. Now, when you're connected, or when we're managing it, we've got the management console, and then you have the ability to also have some self-service for your end users. We'll talk more about controlling that, right? Who can do that in a few slides from now. But this is where we connect to our Druva services, and our Druva services protects Microsoft 365, protects Google, Salesforce, and we're going to continue to add on to those the cloud-based applications that organizations need to protect. Now, connecting to your content, this is one of the nice things about being able to get in and get going, right? If you're a person that wants to do the free trial, you get in and you can actually be backing up your email, backing up a SharePoint, a team, you know, within 15 minutes. So you connect with a global account, right, a global admin account, and you have to use a global admin account at first because we're provisioning an app within your Azure AD. So there's certain things that just have to happen, but after the fact, you can always taper your permissions down for that account that's performing this action, that's making that connection. Now, when we connect to your content, we have a constant connection with OAuth using OAuth 2.0 with your Azure AD. So if you add a new user will automatically get pushed into your Druva console, and they'll follow through the process of automatically being able to be backed up, right? So their Exchange and their OneDrive, access to your SharePoint content in your Exchange, your OneDrive, your SharePoint and Teams, all of that is also done through the Microsoft API services, right? So that layer. Now when we're backing things up, we're doing a read, and we're going to go out and grab that content and create a backup and put that in the AWS cloud. And when we're doing an update back, when we're pushing content back into your tenant, that's when an admin says, hey, I need to make a backup of this team, and I want to create a new team, right? I'm going to create a new team. I want the same people. I want the same channels. I want the same members. I want the same content. Right? So that's how we're creating. We support that, creating a new. Now, as a solution, as an admin, right, in the past, or even a solution architect when I was doing software selections for customers, what I was looking for was platforms that had granularity and flexibility in their model, in their application. So when we're talking about the flexibility, right, similar to 365's role-based administration, you have the same thing. Not everyone needs to be a cloud admin, nor should they. Right, so you can utilize the out-of-the-box role-based functions, or you can actually create customized roles and assign them to your admins or maybe your legal, your legal team. Now, the user provisioning, we talked a little bit about that. right? It's cyclical and it's automatic. So you add a user, that user gets pushed automatically into your into Druva, and we're protecting them. So you don't have to go back there and add them one at a time. Now our profile is something similar to a Microsoft 365 group in that users, you can have multiple users belong to a particular profile and tweak that profile depending on your needs. So you might have an executive leadership team profile and you want to back up their emails and their OneDrive or their Google Drive 3 times a day. And you might have a different group for your finance that you just back up, 2 times a day. You might have a third one for your call center agents that you're only backing them up 1 time a day. So that's the flexibility model that we talked about, right? The flexibility in the architecture that I was looking for. Now, for companies that are that use the multi-geo functionality of 365, you need the ability to support that within your backups as well. So once you define your storage areas, depending on where you are throughout the globe, right, you define these mappings, and Mary Jane, when she comes in, she's automatically going to go to the EU, right? EU, because she's got Germany as an example, she's going to go into the EU storage. John Smith comes in and he's in the US, he's going to go into the US West one. And the same thing applies to your SharePoint and your Teams. So we actually use the metadata that's associated with users and your SharePoint and Teams to help you manage that and stay in compliance, right? To make sure that you're not saving things that were created and that were curated in Germany or the UK. You're not saving them in the United States. Now, as a solution architect, again, I talk about that solution architect all the time. When I'm creating things in 365, I'm not just doing them in a silo, like in one app. So solutions are created with SharePoint, with Teams, with Power Automate, maybe Power Apps, and Power BI, right? You have this collective. That's like one of the things I love about it is that you can build a solution, but they're across multiple applications. So I think the same, though, goes true for protecting your Microsoft 365 information. Right, we close the gap on helping you protect that information where Microsoft isn't doing the same thing for you. So I would say, if you're, like I said before, if you're self-servicing, take advantage of the free trial, or you can get a more in-depth demo of all the features. How do we protect 365? What's the granularity level within SharePoint? How do I preserve a user that's left the company? Right, so a lot of these questions will go into a lot more detail on a more in-depth demo. I think at this point in time, we've got our Q&A right now, I believe, correct?
Absolutely. Yeah, we do have a lot of questions coming in for you from the audience while you were presenting there. Great presentation, by the way, Vanessa. Thank you.
Yeah.
And as Vanessa talked about, if you'd like to get a personal demo, that is on there, as well as a number of other resources or options. So we appreciate your response to that. So let's see, first question that came in, Vanessa, I wanted to ask you, they're asking, what's the licensing model around this? Is it based on volume or is it based on, say, user count?
Oh, yeah, that's a good one. So it's based on license, right? So if you have a license for a user in Exchange, that number is the same number that we're talking about in terms of your licensing. I'm not the licensing expert, but I know it's per license. But we don't charge, though, for, you can have 1,000 users and 10,000 teams and, SharePoint sites. So your SharePoint and your teams are just included as part of that license. So you're not paying an additional cost in terms of the content that's outside of what, an employee's email or their OneDrive.
Okay, interesting. Good point. Thank you. Another question here, Hans is asking about how does Druva meet data residency requirements?
Yeah, I think I talked about that in that last slide. We support our multi-geo. It's one of the nice things, especially for companies that are multi-geo, right? You have to keep your employees' emails and their files in the storage. You're in compliance with like GDPR as an example, so you can't save their information in the U.S. We support that both with our user base as well as your SharePoint and your teams as well.
Okay, nice. Here's kind of a technical question. I'm not sure about this one, but maybe you are. Are you able to restore a Power Automate workflow in SharePoint if a site is deleted by accident?
No, currently today we're not doing Power Automate. In fact, we're going through our planning, and there's certain things that I've pushed to the top of the list as to what the next apps are that we're going to be incorporating, and Power Automate is right on top of that list.
Got it. Okay. And then another question, what about, I lost it. Here it is. Security. So you all back up, say my Microsoft Office 365 or Microsoft 365 data. Who has access to that data? Can Druva see that data, or is it secured?
That's a great question. The only time Druva can see any of this information is if you bring them into your console at all, right? So, but no, during the encryption process, we have no access to, during the encryption process or even after the fact. So we don't have direct access by any means to any of your content. So no one on our can actually go in and download your emails, right?
That's good to know. Important point. Next question here: how long can I keep information of someone that's left the company?
That's another good question. So you can actually use one of what's called a preferred preserve user. So you have your active users and you have preserved license users as well, or preserve users, and you can keep them for however long that you need to. So when we talked about that profile earlier. Some companies are creating a profile and they might keep it, right? Their policy that they're creating in Druva is to keep it indefinitely or to keep it for 7 years. So when that user is part of that profile, it's going to inherit that. So that's really fully customizable to what the customer wants.
Got it. Okay. And then see another question here. My TAM said I don't need backup. Are they wrong?
That's a TAM, for anyone who may not know what that is, that's a technical account manager. It could be from a partner, it could be from Microsoft. I hope my presentation proved that the answer to that, and that is they are wrong. They're incorrect. Maybe they're being misled, or they've listened to this messaging in the past, but you do need to protect your information, right? It's not about protecting Microsoft 365. It's about protecting your information inside of 365.
Great point. And then there is a question here about what do you feel makes Druva stand out kind of in the crowd from other perhaps similar solutions in concept?
Yeah, that's even a good question. So I joined Druva last fall, and it was a major transition for my career, going from being a solution architect to actually going into and working for a company. So, I interviewed across the organization. I watched every single video that there was. I actually even got a free trial. I think what I liked about it is I stepped back to the times where I was doing software selections and what I was looking for, right? Because what I was looking for always represented what a customer, I was always representing a customer's need. They didn't know necessarily what to look for. So I think the first thing I was impressed with was the user interface. It's very clean and it's very easy to use. So I think for these admins that are jumping all over, and even legal admins that have to come into any kind of enterprise backup platform, you have to have a good, clean user interface, and they've stayed true to that. The other thing is being responsive to where our customers are going and what they're using and what they're asking for. As the engineering department, where engineers are concerned, I've had such an amazing experience being part of this team and to help direct or influence the direction. So we're listening to our customers and responding to those, to what our customers are needing. And I really love it. I mean, I love working for Druva.
Excellent. Well, I think that's a great place to wrap up. There are some more technical questions here for you in the queue that perhaps you can respond to electronically. But a great presentation again. Thank you for being on, Vanessa.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you for having me.
All right. I've just brought up the poll question for everyone out there in the audience. I want to call your attention to the poll on the screen that says, what additional information would you like about the Druva solution? We ran out of time there in a live Q&A, but Druva experts and Vanessa will be responding to all the questions that came in electronically. We do appreciate all your questions, and so many good questions here as well around, integration with other solutions, recovery. What are the various recovery options? How do you verify the integrity of the backup data? Let's see, difference, between Druva and other solutions. I think Vanessa may have covered that one. Specific features to look for in an Office 365 data backup solution. So a lot of great questions. Again, the Druva folks will be responding to these, and I want to hopefully get your response as well to the poll question that's on the screen there. I'll give everyone a moment to respond to that. All right, thank you for your responses there to the poll. We do appreciate it. It's now time to keep the Ecocast moving. And with that, I'm excited to introduce you to our next presenter. Welcome Nicholas, who is a Channel Alliance Manager for Cloud Strategy at Red Hat. Nicholas, it's great to have you on the event. I hand it off to you. Take it away.
Thank you for attending our session, Developing on Azure with a Red Hat Openshift. My name is Nicholas Gerasimatos, and I am a Red Hat Channel Alliance Manager and Cloud Strategy Evangelist at Red Hat. I work very closely with Microsoft and Microsoft customers, as well as Red Hat customers, in helping them unlock and harness the power of cloud computing on Microsoft Azure with Red Hat technologies. Today we're going to talk a little bit about customers of various sizes, Fortune 50 to small, medium, and mid-market size businesses, and really what we're seeing as far as tooling and integration with a lot of these cloud services and how OpenShift can help unlock and harness the power of Microsoft Azure. Creating value depends on your ability to deliver applications faster. Solutions like containers, Kubernetes, hybrid cloud, application development platforms, these are all key ingredients to being able to do more with less, or to actually decrease the timelines that it takes to, draw up and architect an application and then actually build it, deploy it, and then get it to GA, and then actually get it in the hands of either a business unit or solutions group or end customers. And these could be things like cloud native applications or applications that were born in the cloud, as well as artificial intelligence, machine learning, data sciences, big data analytics, Internet of Things, 5G, telco, edge, or even culture of innovation applications. The thing that I'm hearing consistently from CEOs and CIOs are that they are wanting to branch into new verticals that they previously have not explored to expand their business units and to expand their line of business, as a whole. And so they're trying to actually innovate, and they're trying to do it in a cloud native way, or at least cloud first. And so they're trying to find, well, what are these common key ingredients that I can use both for my legacy-based applications, which are running either in my data center or in a hybrid type of methodology, but still interface with all of these next generation applications. Because you're kind of at this impasse, right? You're moving applications to the cloud or building applications into the cloud, but maybe most of your infrastructure is still legacy-based infrastructure. These are stateful applications. These are legacy .NET applications. These are legacy Java-based applications. And so you don't want to have a very disparate type of architecture or infrastructure or development platform for one set of tooling, and then a different set of tooling for your next generation or legacy-based applications, right? You want some type of consistency, some type of commonality. Now, it's also important to understand that what developers want is not the same as what IT operations want, right? Developers want to be productive without being bogged down by infrastructure. They want to have self-service types of portals where they can actually go and request resources on demand and consume those resources as necessary without having to wait for IT operations to go and deploy these things. And IT operations, on the other hand, wants to have control, right? They care about security, they care about scalability, they care about SLAs, they care about uptime. They need these applications to run. They need these applications to be scalable. They need these applications to be safe and secure, because at the end of the day, they're responsible for protecting that infrastructure. At the same time, though, it needs to be noted that IT operations do not want to micromanage the developers. They want to empower the developers, but in a way that's meaningful and that adheres to like regulatory compliance, for example, or adheres to the way that they're actually building and deploying applications. So you're actually at this really interesting impasse where developers are saying, give me access to my resources, give me access to my tools, give me access to environments, and I will build anything you want. And operations teams are saying, you absolutely can have access to all of these different resources. However, it has to be within reason, or it has to be through some type of methodology that actually they can track back to where these pieces of code are being developed and deployed, and where are you getting these, for example, container images, right? Did you just download it from the internet? Did you actually build that image on your own? Did it go through some type of penetration testing and validation? Or are you just pulling things from, some type of repo that you found online, and then you're just deploying them without really, understanding what you're specifically deploying? And I think it's important to understand everyone has a job to do. Developers have a job to do. IT operations have a job to do. And while they all fall in the same organization, right, technology, they're very different in what they're both trying to accomplish. Now, as I mentioned earlier, self-service provisioning and access to resources, or self-service access to resources, either through like some type of service catalog or interface, that could be through an API or even command line, whichever you want to view it as. But giving developers access to the things that they need, right? This could be Java-based runtimes. These could be application languages. These could be different types of services and databases, whatever you want to consider it to be. Giving them access to these resources when they need them on the fly without having to constantly go to the IT operations group and wait for a deployment or some type of provisioning to happen is very important when it comes to developer productivity. In that same aspect, having a consistent environment is incredibly important for developers. So a developer goes and they write their code and they deploy it to an environment, and then they matriculate it to the next version of test, and they get a completely different outcome. And we're talking about two different environments here. The developer doesn't necessarily know, is it my code or my application that's misbehaving, or is it the environment that I'm deploying it to? So having some type of level of consistency across these environments is incredibly important, especially when you're talking about microservices and databases and even application runtimes. If you have an unexpected outcome and you're trying to debug and solve that that end result or that outcome, then you don't necessarily understand, is it the infrastructure that maybe is misbehaving, or is it my application code that I need to go re-examine again? And I think it's really important to understand that having consistency is important. No matter if it's running in the cloud or running in your own individual data center, your code should behave the same no matter where you're deploying it, as long as it's not, bottlenecked or resource constrained by the underlying infrastructure component pieces. Now, having automated build deploy, CI/CD pipelines, and configuration management are all incredibly important as well. In regards to automated build and deploy, a developer should be able to write their code, make a commit, version it, and then have your CI/CD pipeline actually go out, build that versioned code, right, and deploy that application or components of that application, right? A component could be all of the underlying dependencies. It could be a database for a stateful-based application or something along those lines. But having it so that these things get versioned and deployed in a very seamless fashion, but still adhering to your configuration management and your logging and your metrics of your security compliancy and things along those lines, is also incredibly important. It still empowers your developers to go write their code, make commits to that code, version their code, and therefore deploy it. But it's all done through a seamless type of interface, a seamless type of platform. And this could be consuming native services in Azure. So for example, maybe you're using a data lake, maybe specifically you're using hosted databases, and your container is a series of microservices that actually go and interface with all these different endpoints and pull data or push data to it or whatever you want to consider it to be. Having the ability to stream all of that through automation and through a self-service platform, a single pane of glass, is really what the developers are looking for. So just to summarize, what I'm trying to say is all of these pieces of build, test, deploy, the provisioning, the consistency, the automation, the pipelines, configuration management, logs, and metrics, these are all incredibly important when it comes to building an application, deploying it, validating it, performance testing it, deploying it and running it, monitoring it, and then making configuration changes and doing it over and over and over again. And all of that can be done through Azure Red Hat Openshift, and it can take advantage of all of the native services that Microsoft Azure has to offer. There's so many Azure Cloud native services that are available that Red Hat Openshift can interface with, take advantage of, or even interact with. And we'll cover a little bit of that in the next couple of slides. But it's important to understand developer productivity is directly tied to the application development platform and also to the cloud services that application development platform is interfacing with. I would never think that you would be running all of your applications specifically within containers on Kubernetes, for example. I know that developers are going to be taking advantage of some of the hosted services and native services that Azure offers. And so it's really important to understand the distinction of, well, where does the container runtime and where do my containers end and where does the cloud native services begin, right? That could be things like enabling, serverless computing, or even, as I mentioned, interfacing with data lakes, for example. But it's important to understand that there is a point where, Kubernetes ends or containers end, and then cloud native services begin, and then taking advantage of both of those is really what's going to help empower organizations to achieve their goals. So one of the most awesome things about OpenShift, at least in my opinion, is that there's a very distinct separation between the developer and the IT operations experience. The OpenShift Developer Console is very streamlined. It gives a developer-centered perspective that offers a simplified view of Kubernetes concepts so that I can really focus on what matters, right? Building my application, writing my code, making my commits, committing that code, versioning it, deploying it, creating and managing these applications from my source code, right? Like, for example, importing source code from Git, and then viewing those applications and then troubleshooting them. So, for example, you deploy a container, it starts to run and then it crashes for some reason. The ability to get access to the configuration or the logs or any of the underlying pieces that you need to actually troubleshoot that application or to determine why it's not running appropriately, right? Also, the simplified visibility of viewing application topology, viewing the structure and status of the application and all of those application components and underlying dependencies, drilling into the component connections, those workload details, navigating to, again, pod logs, metrics, resource utilization, all of that stuff directly from a single console is really what we've tried to focus on when it came to OpenShift. And really that's what people love about OpenShift is that they have this single pane of glass to go in to not just write their code, make their commits, deploy their applications, but then to version them and actually view the entire CI/CD pipelines if you're interfacing with things like Git and Jenkins and SonarQube and all this other great stuff. Having that ability to all interface that directly into a single console that's very streamlined for a developer to get access to the resources or the configurations and to view and troubleshoot any of the applications that they're deploying, or even to just get basic high-level information from these applications that they've already previously deployed, right? So having the ability to have all of that streamlined into a single interface is very, very powerful for many different developers. And not having to bounce back and forth between the developer console and OpenShift and then having to go into, like, for example, Azure and taking a look at Azure Monitor and pulling all that information from the Azure Monitor logs. If you have all of this technically being ingested in OpenShift, you can actually see real time all of that information as it's actually being collected and is easily accessible for all of the different developers. So in regards to life cycles, I think it's also really important to talk about Operator Hub and Red Hat certified operators and how we actually have built these into Openshift. And also I want to talk a little bit about some other exciting stuff that we have in regards to operators. So for those that aren't familiar, Operator Hub is the web console interface and OpenShift container platform that a cluster administrator can use to discover and install operators. So with one click, an operator can be pulled from its off-cluster source, installed and subscribed on the cluster, and made ready for engineering or development teams to self-service manage the product across deployment environments using the OLM or Operator Lifecycle Manager. So a cluster administrator can choose from various different operator sources that are essentially grouped into the following categories. There's the first-party versions, which are the Red Hat operators. These are, essentially Red Hat products that are packaged and shipped specifically by Red Hat, and these are supported by Red Hat. There's certified operators, which are products from leading independent software vendors or ISVs. These could be Red Hat partners, for example. And these are made available. We work with them to package and ship these. They're supported by the ISV, but we actually also bless them as well. There's the community operators. These are optionally visible software so that the operations teams can choose to make them visible or not visible. And really, they're supported for the most part by the Operator Framework community on GitHub. So if you look up Operator Framework community operators, you can find it there. There's no official support for those. However, you can take a community operator, pull it down, validate it within your own individual environment, and consume that on your own if you choose to do so. And then there's the ability to do custom operators. And custom operators are essentially operators that you add to the cluster yourself. And what you could do is if you have a very complex application, there's a lot of individual dependencies, you can actually turn that essentially into a pre-scripted automated installation and have it as a custom operator. And operators on Operator Hub are packaged to run on OLM. So essentially it includes the YAML file called the cluster service version or CSV, which contains all of the CRDs, the RBAC rules, deployment, container images, everything that's required to install and securely run the operator. This also includes, user visible information like a description of its features, supported Kubernetes versions. We also make the Operator SDK available to be used to assist developers in packaging their operators for use on OLM and also on Operator Hub. So if you have a commercial-based application, for example, that you have built and you want to make accessible to your customers, you can get it included using the certification workflows that are provided by Red Hat's ISV partner portal. And you can actually find out more information on that if you go to connect.redhat.com. But then the other piece of this is the Operator Hub architecture, right? So the Operator Hub UI component is driven by the marketplace operator by default on OpenShift Container Platform. And the Operator Hub CRD is included in that, which is essentially one of the cornerstone components and pieces for building and running operators. And for those that aren't familiar, CRD is the custom resource definitions. The reason why I'm so excited about this is because Microsoft Azure actually has a community-based service broker that can be installed as an operator, and that allows you to natively take advantage of all of the native Azure services. You can actually find this if you just do a search, do a search for Azure Red Hat OpenShift or OpenShift Microsoft Azure Operator or Service Broker. And you'll see that there's one that's made, generally available and that interfaces with a lot of the native services. In regards to, what services are specifically supported as of today, I know resource groups, event hubs, Azure SQL, Azure databases for Postgres and MySQL, Key Vaults, I believe Azure Cache for Redis, blob storage accounts, virtual networks, application insights, and virtual machine scale sets. And I think also Cosmos DB are all supported. This is constantly evolving. I know if you go and you look at the GitHub page, which is github.com/Azure/Azure-service-operator, you'll be able to go there and you'll be able to take a look and see how it's constantly evolving and changing. And I think like the last released version was just on April 21st. So we're talking, less than 6 weeks ago. But yeah, definitely take a look at that. There's so many fantastic pieces as far as, that service broker and the ability to natively from Openshift consume native Azure services without ever having to leave Openshift. It's very useful for developers who are looking for that whole self-service type of methodology, ability to go and get access to databases or other various things on demand without ever having to leave the Azure console. So I highly recommend taking a look at that. Now, I also want to take a moment to acknowledge that Openshift is really designed to greater developer productivity. We have a lot of really great things that we built into Openshift, such as code-ready workspaces, which are basically web-based IDE, collaborative environments. You could integrate them natively with CI/CD pipelines. So for onboarding developers, they really have like a turnkey, ready-to-go development environment with all of its dependencies already prepackaged and deployed. So, I think back to years ago where whenever I was onboarded in a new company, I did a lot of consulting. I would have to wait for them to provision a virtual machine for me. They had these development virtual machines that they would throw in the cloud. So, I would start my job, I would get a new laptop, then I would put in a request. They would basically provision a VM, in the cloud, and then they would say, okay, go ahead and log in and get it set up. That's going to be your development environment. And then I would log into that environment, and there wouldn't be anything there really. And then I would have to go through the process of essentially configuring my entire environment so that it was actually a usable environment for myself to actually do my development. And that would basically take, anywhere from 2 to 6 weeks, depending on, how locked down that infrastructure was, right? Because sometimes installing things in different environments is, to be honest, perfectly painful. And so we decided that we would, include these web-based IDE workspaces so that developers really could just be onboarded and working within a matter of days. We also included Openshift ODO, which I'm going to talk about in a second, which is really an advanced developer CLI. And then we have a lot of plugins and integration. So Visual Studio Code, Azure Pipelines, GitHub Actions, Eclipse IDE, as I mentioned previously with the code-ready workspaces, JetBrains, all of this stuff built natively into Openshift, which also can interact with Azure natively as well. So if you're building an application and deploying it in a cloud-native environment, like on Microsoft Azure, so built in the cloud, deployed on the cloud, you have a very consistent experience as well as when you're doing it, on-premise, right? So maybe you want to interface with some of the on-premise, infrastructure that you currently have, and you're also using Openshift in your own individual data center. It's going to be a very consistent look and feel for developers. They don't have two different ways of actually building their code and deploying their code. It's a very consistent type of experience for them, regardless of whether they're actually building and deploying their applications and their code. So as I mentioned, Openshift Do, or ODO, as a lot of people call it. So really the whole idea behind it is a fast, iterative way, straightforward CLI tool for developers who write, build, and deploy applications on Openshift. So we were looking at, how can we empower developers to do more with less? And what we realized was, creating deployment configurations, build configurations, service routes, and other Openshift Container Platform elements could all be automated. But existing tools such as OC, which are more operations focused and require a deep understanding of Kubernetes and OpenShift Container Platform concepts, was a little bit more complicated than most developers wanted to focus on. And so we came up with ODO to really abstract away the complex Kubernetes and OpenShift Container Platform concepts to really allow developers to focus on what's most important to them, which is code. And so, it's a simple syntax design centered around, concepts that are familiar to developers, such as projects, applications, components. It's completely client-based. There's no additional server other than OpenShift Container Platform required for deployment. Has official support for Node.js and Java components. There's also compatibility with languages and frameworks such as Ruby, Perl, PHP, and Python. It can detect changes to local code and then deploy it to the cluster automatically, so it can provide them essentially real-time feedback so that they can actually validate their changes in essentially real time, right? And it lists all the available components and services from the OpenShift Container Platform cluster. So really the core concepts are really born on the fact of, project is your source code, its tests, its libraries organized into, a separate single unit. There's the application itself, right? An application is a program designed for end users. An application consists of many, many, many microservices or components that work individually to build the entire application. So for example, of an application would be a video game, a media player, a web browser, right? For example. And then components. So a component is a set of Kubernetes resources which host code or data. Each component can be run and deployed separately. So an example of a component would be like Node.js, Perl, PHP, Python, or Ruby. And then services. So a service is a software that your components links to or depends on. This could be a database, right? So it's just MariaDB. It could be Jenkins. It could be MySQL. And ODO services are provisioned from the Openshift service catalog and must be enabled within the cluster specifically. And you have to have obviously all of those available container images, that you're going to be specifically consuming available as well. But really, as I mentioned, it's designed to abstract away the complexity of Kubernetes and OpenShift concepts from the developer, because really at the end of the day, the developer does not care about these things. The developer is really focused on, I need to write my code, I need to build my application, I need to fix my defects, I need to deploy this, and then the business unit might come back and ask for changes. They might ask for adding additional features or functionality, and incorporating that back into my code, and then therefore redeploying the new version again and again. This is a continuous life cycle, right? Make your changes, validate your changes, deploy your code, validate your code, and then do it again and again and again. And so again, this ties into the whole OpenShift to do, increasing the simplicity of this for developers and abstracting away all of that high-level complexity. The last thing that we'll talk about is OpenShift Service Mesh. A service mesh is essentially an open source project for integrating and managing traffic workflow across multiple different services. So it really works in concert with underlying cluster manager like Kubernetes, for example, having centralized components, sidecar proxies, and node agents working together to create the data and control planes over distributed applications. It also ties into tracing applications, so allowing you to track a single request as it makes its way between multiple different services or even inside a service itself, to provide insight into the entire request process from start to finish. So for example, OpenShift Service Mesh uses Jaeger, which is really, for the most part, an open source distributed tracing system, and then integrates that into a visualization so that you can actually see the communication pathways between multiple different services, how they're being managed, how the traffic is flowing in near real time for easier management and troubleshooting. And that ties into things like Kiali, which is also an open source project that's designed to view configurations, monitoring traffic, and analyze application traces as well. And this is available, again, as an operator. So it can be installed through a single click. It can be consumed by multiple different business units. And really the idea of a service mesh is to really enable greater developer productivity, right? Integrating with communication policies without changing the application code or integrating language-specific libraries. And we wanted to really streamline it and make it easy to install. Hence the reason why we went with the whole idea of the operator on it, because it's not just the installation of it, but it's also the upgrades from version to version, because as Kubernetes versions changes and the runtime and the container runtime and all these different components and pieces that make up a container platform change, you have to have both forward and backward compatibility. And we wanted to make sure that we had that compatibility there, and therefore we put this into the operator. So when you're actually doing upgrades to your OpenShift container platform, all of those components and pieces that run specifically within that service mesh also upgrade seamlessly. So that being said, I really hope that you've all enjoyed the time that we spent together, the things that we've had a chance to actually discuss and to talk about. I think we'll open things up for a live Q&A at this point. And, feel free to ask any questions you might have.
All right. Thanks so much, Nicholas. Really appreciate that. Just fascinating stuff that you all are doing there at Red Hat. I'm afraid we ran out of time for our live Q&A, but we are welcoming your questions electronically. We've got a lot of great questions already coming in during Nicholas's presentation there. And I brought up the poll question for anyone for everyone to respond to. We do appreciate your responses on that. That really helps Nicholas and the folks at Red Hat to know what you are thinking and what you would like in response to the presentation here that they just gave. So hope that you'll answer the poll. I will leave that up. The folks from Red Hat are taking your questions electronically again, so keep those good questions coming. Don't forget about our best question prize. And then also, it's now time for our first Amazon $500 gift card announcement. We have a gift card going going out to Aaron K. from California. Congratulations, Aaron K. from California. We'll reach out to you to deliver your gift card after the event. We've got 2 more $500 gift cards to give out, and of course the best question prizes as well. All right, I'll leave the poll up for another moment and let everyone respond while I sort through these questions, many questions that have come in. All right, thank you to your responses, or for your responses on the poll. If you haven't responded yet, now's the time to get it in, because we are moving on now to our next presentation. I'm excited now to introduce you to our next presenter on the Ecocast. Welcome, Basir Balazera, Senior Technical Marketing Engineer at Gigamon. Basir, it's great to have you. Take it away.
Hi, everyone, and thanks for joining. My name is Basir Balazare. I am a Senior Technical Marketing Engineer with Gigamon, and for the last 5 years, my focus has been around the cloud. So in today's presentation, we'll talk about visibility in the cloud, and then we'll talk about how we do that in a container space. Okay, let's get started. Before we get a little bit deeper, let me describe who I am, a little background of myself. I've been in IT for about 15 years. I used to manage data centers. I used to run corporate IP departments. I work for a Fortune 150 company. I work for Fortune 100 companies. I've been employee number 46 at a startup. So I've done very, very large, I've done very, very small, and in between. And so one of the things that stands out the most for me is when developers will ask me to provide them access to compute. It will take anywhere from 9 to 12 months to do that. And now it's literally, you go, you swipe your credit card and you have unlimited access to unlimited everything on a global scale using one of the public cloud vendors. And so today, I'll talk about some of the challenges around that and specific around containers and what it is and how Gigamon can solve that for you guys. So actually, this slide is a summary of what it is I just said, moving to the cloud very quickly and rapidly, having access to everything. But it becomes challenging, right? The challenging part of it is just because you're using somebody else's hardware and you're renting from them, it doesn't mean that your responsibility goes away. It's still your job to make sure that whatever security that you have in your data center, it still applies in the public cloud space. And one of the things that the cloud vendors have is this idea of the shared responsibility model. And what that means is they will make sure that they are taking care of the actual compute. So basically, they're responsible of the cloud. You're responsible of what's in the cloud. And so this happens with all the cloud vendors. And so this becomes a challenge, and this is a challenge that Gigamon is able to solve. So if I show this slide, this talks about how this is life without Gigamon, right? So you have your infrastructure, you got all the typical network stack that we're all used to seeing, the firewalls, the routers, the switches, the virtualization farm, and probably a lot of cloud. And I would imagine most of you guys have probably become SaaS managers, right? You're managing Office 365, you're managing Gmail, you're managing Dropbox, so different SaaS solutions. So IT has become basically SaaS managers in my world. All right, so this is the challenge that Gigamon sees, and so let's see how Gigamon is able to resolve this. So what Gigamon does is we acquire the traffic from the different layers of your network stack. So it could be the virtual layer, it could be the physical layer, it could be the public cloud layer. So no matter which layer, we have the ability of getting actual raw packets from that environment. So layer 2 through layer 4 raw packet visibility. And then once we get that, we bring it into something, our visibility analytics fabric. And so this is where we do the ML, and so the first thing is getting access. The next thing is the aggregation. The third thing is the transformation. And so what does this mean? What does transformation mean? Transformation means that since we're acquiring the traffic from multiple locations, we're bound to see the same packets over and over and over again. So rather than sending multiple copies of the same packet to the tools, let's just send one copy. And so what this does is this lowers the the fire hose that's being sent over the tools. And then so rather than tools having to spend their CPU cycles dropping the things they don't care about, Gigamon could do that. Another thing that we could do, Gigamon does, is the filtering capabilities. So let's say you have a web application firewall, a WAF. It all really cares about is TCP port 443 or 80, right? It doesn't care about any of the traffic that's on your network. So why bombard it with a bunch of stuff it doesn't need to see? Let's filter the relevant traffic to send over to the tool. Now this slide gets a little bit more detail about what are some of the components. What is it that Gigamon can do as far as the Gigasmarts? So I won't get too deep into it. The biggest ones that really stand out are usually the deduplication, the filtering, the netflow generation. And I think this one's another big one too, the SSL decryption. So a lot of information is being encrypted, which is great. We need to encrypt everything. But the IT person, you need to know, if somebody's sending traffic to one of those cloud shared folders, you need to see what it is, right? You want to make sure it's not IP, your company's intellectual property, being sent over to a place that you have no control over. So this is where Gigamon can do the TLS decryption. But then at the same time, healthcare or banking, you don't want to decrypt that traffic. You want to keep that encrypted because your employees need to make sure that that stuff is being kept encrypted and not decrypted. So this is where you can pick and choose what gets decrypted and what gets encrypted. All right, so we're all making the move into the cloud, which is great. It's making life a lot easier. We're able to move at the speed of light and build applications really, really fast. But then there's this gap that's starting to be established. So we have our cloud apps and tools that are great, but then we also have spent, 10, 15 years building our data center presence. So do we just throw all that away and then move everything over to cloud and then start from scratch again? And this is one of the things that we're seeing with all our customers is this visibility gap that's coming in place. So how are we able to optimize our customers' experience? Are we able to still provide the same security and compliance that we have in our data centers? How do we manage the complexity and the cost of running into a cloud, but possibly even multi-cloud? And what is driving our cloud adoption? And I think most of that is probably containers, right? The whole digital transformation that's happening is because of containers. Okay. And so what Gigamon has introduced is this thing called the Hawk. And so the Gigamon Hawk provides, it runs on any source. So all the different clouds that we support, and most of you guys are probably using and supporting. We also have the transformation part of it. So all the different tools that we're able to send to. So Gigamon has about 150 eco partners that we work with that we're able to provide the visibility into the packet that they need to see. And we could run in any form factor. So legacy systems is referring to your data centers and what are the whatever system that you have. Some of you may be running stuff in bare metal. Operation technology. So this is more of the devices. So if you have like a medical IoT devices, if you have manufacturing IoT devices, so some of these devices that's become very challenging to gain access and visibility into. But because Gigamon operates on the network layer, so layer 2, we are able to passively gain that visibility into that infrastructure. And of course, while we're here for this call, this session is the containers or microservices. One of the things that's, I think, made the digital transformation revolutionary is in the sense that we are now using containers to build our applications, which basically decouples us from one, the underlying infrastructure, and two, the code base that we're using. So if you build an application in, let's say, Java, sometimes it becomes really hard to build new functionalities to your application because Java may not be flexible enough to do that. Maybe Perl, maybe Erlang, maybe C++. These different applications, these different languages are able to solve a problem that Java may not be able to. So containers have made life a lot easier by being able to use those different languages, and then they all work together in a microservices environment to then solve an issue for us. And mobility is more around our 5G, 4G space, which I won't get too much into on this session. And overall combined, this is what we do to provide that pervasive visibility through the transformation of the packets that we see in a single tool. Now, one more slide that I like to talk about is, again, this growing complexity of having the visibility in a cloud environment, right? So, and this also applies to your data center too. So you have multiple tools, you have that need to be able to gain that visibility into the environment, and same thing with public cloud. And this is how Gigamon is able to solve that challenge for us. Okay, so now let's fast forward a little bit and see how the actual solution works. So we'll start off with this one. So this is the Gigamon Cloud Suite. The entire thing is orchestrated and managed through something called the GigaView Fabric Manager. So moving forward, I will refer to this as FM, Fabric Manager. So Gigamon has built a single solution. So it's a single software that you log into that's able to manage all of Gigamon's physical appliances, virtual appliances, or all the different clouds that you're logging into. And so these are some screenshots of what that looks like. So this is a dashboard that gives you right away a health status of what's happening with your environment. This is where you create the maps. This is where you say, I need to get the traffic from this source, and then I need to send the traffic to this destination. So this is the maps for all of the physical and virtual. And then the next screen, the inventory is the actual physical appliances, virtual appliances, and here's a list of the clouds that we're able to get that traffic from. And so the cool thing about this, it's a single place that you go to be able to manage your entire infrastructure. You don't have to jump from screen to screen to screen. A couple of tabs you have to jump around, but you have to log into a new application, to a new program. You're able to gain that visibility into your entire infrastructure, no matter where that runs. And that's really cool thing about it. And so now let's talk about how the solution actually gets deployed. So I will start off with, this is with AWS, but as you will see, the common theme here is it's the same look, the same feel, no matter which cloud you're running into. All right, so the very first thing, so in this scenario, we have a fabric manager that resides in your data center. So that's the FM. Fabric Manager has SDKs and APIs built into it for whatever cloud infrastructure you use. So if you're using VMware, then we incorporate with vCenter or NSXT Manager. If you're using Nutanix, then with Prisma Access. If you're using OpenStack, if you're using VMware, AWS, Azure, GCP, any of those. FM has those APIs and SDKs built into it to do that tight integration with the infrastructure. So the very first thing that FM does is establishes that secure connection into the cloud vendors management platform. Next, we deploy our visibility tier. And so in the public cloud vendors, our visibility solution is another machine. It's another appliance that we upload to the cloud vendors marketplace whenever we have a new version. Then we get a copy of that traffic from our EC2 or from our VMs. There's multiple ways that we get this copy, which I'll talk about a little bit more in this presentation. And then from there, you pick and choose. Do you want traffic in tools that you are using a virtual version of it? Or do you want to send that traffic back to your data center? So one of the things I like to think about is Gigamon's Hawk is able to extend the life and the reach of your existing tool set in your data center into a cloud environment. So earlier on, I talked about how we've spent 10, 15, 20 years building our data centers. Why would we want to just give that up right away? So this is a solution that's able to aid with that. Surprise, surprise. Same solution for Azure. Exact same thing. Not much has changed. That's why I'm even going to build it out. All right. Now, another thing is earlier I was showing you a hybrid deployment, but the solution, of course, works as all in the cloud. So if you are on a much more advanced part of the journey into the cloud and you've already lift and shifted or refactored or moved all your equipment into, or your environment into a cloud environment, Gigamon can also support that too. This could be a pure software play. One of the things that I'm seeing a lot very common is this idea of having a SecOps VPC, where you create kind of a landing page. A landing where one of the benefits that we have in our data centers is, I know people hate this term, a choke point, but we had a single choke point in our data center, right? What could go in, what could go out, we had control over that. The security team, the networking team had that. But with a cloud environment, it becomes a lot harder to do that because you could very easily set up NAT gateways or just regular internet gateways and then be able to get out from anywhere. So what the IT teams are starting to do now, and in the hopes of wrapping their arms around this cloud environment, is creating a centralized location where they are controlling what traffic comes in and out of their infrastructure, of their cloud infrastructure, using this centralized location. So this is where we have this concept of a SecOps VPC, where so that becomes basically our hub. And then the spokes are the different business units or the different groups that set up their environment. One thing I like to equate is, so if you have a VPC, a virtual private cloud, or a VNet for Azure, is this idea that in our data centers, we used to use virtual LANs to create network segmentation, right? Going from a flat network to a multi-layered network. And so now customers or people are doing the same thing in the public cloud with using either VPCs or actual different accounts to create the segmentation, which plays well with Kubernetes and with containers. Again, it's the whole decoupling of things so that you could grow a portion of it and without having to impact the other portion of it. And of course, Gigamon's Hawk solution helps with that and supports that. And of course, if you had a data center, we could use VPN connection, you could use ExpressRoute, you could use Direct Connect, and we could send that traffic back if you needed to. And this is one of my favorite slides. It's a lot happening here, but if any of you guys have supported any of your developers or applications, then this is very familiar to you. We have our development stage, we have our staging area, and then we have production. Sometimes there's another one where the QA comes in here too, right? To do the testing to make sure before it goes out to production. And this is, again, part of the whole CI/CD pipeline that allows our developers to continuously deploy their code. And then we have machines that build the builds, and then it gets pushed onto production. And then we could do A/B testing because we're behind load balancers. Our users may not know if we're using version A or version B, and if something's wrong with version B, we could yank it, and then version A takes up. So this is a really cool part about how Gigamon's solution is able to fit this mindset of the CI/CD pipeline. So in this scenario, they have isolated the development. They don't want anybody to have outside access to this environment. So this is where we deploy the vSeries closest to the applications to provide that visibility in a development stage, which is really important now because of the zero trust model and some of the things that we've seen with the hacks and with the supply chain hacks that have been happening. So this is very, very important. And then as we go into staging, into prod, then we have a centralized location that we want to go bring that visibility into. And so then we're able to use one of the cloud vendors' transit gateways to be able to accomplish that. And as I mentioned earlier, if you are in a data center that happens to support Direct Connect or ExpressRoute or with the cloud vendors, of course, then our solution could be a software in the cloud, the public cloud, hardware in your data center, so it goes both ways. Now, I'm going to talk about our way of being able to acquire traffic multiple ways. All right, so the very, very first, I should mention, Gigamon was the very first company to provide network packet visibility enterprise level in AWS. So I was there at reInvent in November of 2016 when we launched our product, and it was amazing because a lot of people were like, wait, so you're giving us flow logs? Isn't that what AWS does? It's like, no. We're giving you actual raw packets, layer 2 to layer 4 raw packets for you to inspect. They were kind of blown away with that. Like, wait, you could give us actual packets in a cloud environment? How is that possible? Cloud vendors are doing everything in their power to provide network packet visibility. Aren't you breaking laws and rules? It's like, no, we have the solution. And in fact, we've been working very closely with AWS, and AWS supports it. And so this is something that we're able to do. But at the same time, we know a lot of our customers do not like the idea of having to deploy something new on their infrastructure to gain that visibility. So Gigamon's solution was we use a kernel mod. So you have a Linux operating system. We use built-in functionality of the Linux operating system to get a copy of the packet to send over to our vSeries. But I could see how some people will dislike this idea because it's an additional thing they have to deploy under instances to gain that visibility. And so we were super excited when both Azure came out with their VTAP in 2017, and then AWS came out with their VPC mirroring capabilities in June of 2019. And for us, like, yes, this is great. Now we can gain that visibility into the infrastructure without the customers having to deploy our kernel mods or Windows agents onto the workloads. Now, the way this works is Fabric Manager does the orchestration of instantiating the taps in that environment. So you go into FM, you tell FM, hey, I want to use VPC mirroring capabilities in this environment to get the traffic out of it. And this is what FM does. FM goes and instantiates the VPC mirroring. Mind you, without Gigamon, it's a 7-step process per instance, and it's you have to do it proactively. Whereas Gigamon is able to do this automatically. So because we have the tight API integration, you push a button, we go and we automatically get the traffic. And the other cool thing about this is we have this thing called automatic target selection. So when you create a map and you say, I want visibility in all of my database servers. So you could use VM tags, you can use different parameters to set up that filter. Okay, cool. So you have 5 instances that are being monitored. So let's say there's a rush that comes, and then all of a sudden your database goes from 5 instances to 7 instances. Because we have that automatic target selection and the tight API integration, when those 2 brand new databases come online, we will automatically instantiate the tapping capabilities and then get traffic from there. And then when the rush is gone and you go from 7 down to 4, we will also shrink our environment to support that. Now, I wanted to provide a quick visibility or summary of our own native tapping capabilities versus using the platform. So the first 4 are the same. But then after that, these are some of the additional things that Gigamon is able to provide with our own native tapping solution that we have. Unfortunately, Azure's tap has been on pause. We're really hopeful that they will be able to reintroduce and open up again because a lot of customers really enjoyed having that, the native tapping solution. Now, before I go into containers, one other thing I did want to mention is we do have a multi-cloud visibility solution. Which I think you guys probably understand that. It's a single FM that's able to reach into the different clouds and provide the visibility, right? So not much is changing. Okay, now let's talk about how we do this in a container environment. All right, we deploy, so there's 3 different ways of doing this, right? So either service mesh, there's actually deploying a container within a pod, within an environment to get the traffic. And another one is Gigamon's container visibility, network broker as a container. So we have 3 methods of being able to provide this visibility. So let me go into the next slide, and it gets a little bit deeper technical how we do this. So again, the very first thing is FM has a tight integration with Kubernetes. What it does is we registered a Gigamon VTAP container service and profiles. So that's the very first thing that gets established. Next, we deploy the container tap into the pod, into the work nodes, into, again, you determine where is the best place to do this. Once that's done, then we associate the traffic policies to security groups. Another thing that also happens is most likely you're using some kind of a network over like a CNI, right? Calico or I am forgetting the other one. Calico or I forget another one. So whatever network overlay you're using, then what Gigamon does is that container is able to tap that CNI for us to get the traffic out of it. And then again, then it comes into our vSeries node, or if you have it, and so vSeries node would be, if you have it in a public cloud environment, if you are running in a VMware environment, you could send it to another vSeries that's in a virtual environment, or you can send it to our hardware. So you can pick and choose what works best for you. And the thing that's starting to happen now is with 5G, the lines of the lines are starting to get blurry. With 5G, a lot of those functions that used to be hosted on a physical hardware now is running in a virtual environment. So NFVs is network function virtualization is the thing that's happening. So there's a lot of synergy between our visibility solution and containers and a ESX or in a public cloud environment, like for example, native or EKS or AKS versus running this in a pure 5G environment. So you can mix and match. And one of the things that I also realized in talking to customers is one size does not fit all. So out of the box, the solution will probably be able to provide you 75, 80% of what you need, but there's that 20% that you've modified your environment to work best for you, that then we'll need to kind of modify the solution to give you that best 100% visibility. And again, you pick and choose what's the best for you. What are the best options for you? And I wanted to then just quickly, one more time, just show that we can do this across multiple clouds. It could be physical, virtual, containers, everything. Redshift, whatever it is that you're using, we can provide this visibility. And the next slide is a quick summary of what it is that we can do. So we have our pattern flow mapping capabilities, where you can, where we do the filtering of the appropriate traffic to send to the right tool to inspect. We have our target automatic target selection. So this applies to all of them, right? So if you're using NSXT, we can use NSXT's native tapping capabilities to get the traffic out of the instances. And again, we instantiate that with VPC mirroring, with any of those, whatever native tapping capabilities there are. One other thing I should also mention is we can also use tunnel as a source. So if you have let's say an F5 that's able to, you're using those as a load balancer, we can get a copy of the F5s. So they have a mirroring capability. We get that from there. If you're using Cisco CSR 1000V, we could get a span port, it's called ER span from that. So Gigamon has multiple ways of being able to acquire that traffic, depending on whatever your use case is. And then from there, once we get the traffic, then we have our patents, Gigasmarts. So I showed you that long list of all the different things with the packets, the duplication, Ssl decryption, filtering capabilities, net flow generation, all those things. And then if you're in the 5G space, we could do stuff with cups and correlations and all that. And of course, it works on any cloud. I want to say thank you, and please ask any questions.
All right, excellent presentation. Thank you so much. I really appreciate that, Basir. Really cool what you're showing us there, how Gigamon can help to make monitoring and analysis of and visualization of network traffic just so much more efficient. I brought up the poll question for everyone out there. The question on the screen is, what additional information would you like about the Gigamon solution? And we do appreciate your response there to the poll. Basir is standing by to answer your questions electronically. We ran out of time, again, for our live Q&A. We've had such excellent in-depth presentations today on the Ecocast that we're running out of time for our live Q&A sessions that we normally do. But keep those questions coming in electronically. We've got a lot of good questions coming in. Thank you for those. Don't forget about our best question prize as well. So I'll leave the poll question up for a moment and allow everyone to respond there, and then we'll move on to our next presentation. Don't forget, we've got another Amazon $500 gift card coming up. That'll be after our next presentation. All right, thanks to everyone who responded there to the poll, and thanks for the excellent questions. It's time now to move on to our next presentation. I'm excited to introduce Mr. Joseph Carson, Chief Security Scientist at Thycotic. Joseph, it's great to have you on again. Take it away.
Everyone, my name is Joseph Carson. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm the Chief Security Scientist and Advisory CISO at Thycotic. And today's session is really to take you through a bit of a journey, to take you into understanding about the Privileged Access Management Checklist. It's a way to make sure that you get onto the path to success with Privileged Access Management. Many of you might be at different stages. You might be already advanced in deploying and configuring and using Privileged Access Security. You might be in the middle of kind of just getting it rolled out. Or you might even be in the early stages of just starting to look at password management and password security itself. But this is for all of you. No matter what stage of the journey you're on, this is really to help you get to the next stage, to accelerate, and to get as much value as you possibly can out of a Privileged Access Management solution. So hopefully this will be interesting, and hopefully you will take away some good tips and best practices to get you off on the right path. So the first thing is, for many organizations, the threats, they are real. They are happening. Many organizations out there are becoming victims, costing millions and millions of dollars. It's really important that we actually understand about what we're dealing with, because the better we understand about what we're dealing with, the better chance we have of putting the right defenses in place. And these are the real things that keep security leaders up at night. You know, the fear of malware getting into your organization, you know, financial fraud through business email compromise, or through basically, getting access to unauthorized systems. Ransomware causing havoc and downtime in the environments to almost bringing businesses to a complete standstill. All of these are real serious threats, and they all ultimately have some type of revenue or brand damage, or preventing the business from actually delivering or providing the service to their customers, employees, and partners, etc. So these are things that many organizations out there, these are the real threats, and these are the things that we must prioritize and look at what is the right security controls, what's the right practices to reduce the risk from these. And for many of these, what's the reason? Why do they commonly occur? Why do we see almost every single day a major headline in the news that there's been some type of data breach or security incident? And many of these, it all comes down to poor access management, insecure applications and APIs, human error, misconfigured cloud storage, by thinking, about taking the same practices of on-premise security and trying to retrofit it into the cloud. It just doesn't work. In many cases, that same security that we do on-premise does not simply just work straight into the cloud. We have to approach it in a different way. Many organizations with overprivileged users have too many credentials or too many permissions or too much authorization. Some of those being things like the local administrator account, sharing of credentials between employees, and for also many, passwords being the only security control that's really stopping attackers from getting access. These are some of the most common causes, and we must look at how can we actually strengthen these? How can we take them to the next level? How can we get that we actually have the best practices in place? How can we get organizations to becoming more resilient? And ultimately, attackers do target privileged access, because privileged access is what really allows them to get away with a crime. It allows them to stay hidden. It allows them to cause as much damage as possible by deploying ransomware to as many systems as possible, to really identifying critical and valuable assets within the networks. This is really why attackers really want to gain access to privileged accounts. And for many organizations, they don't really have a good visibility of what privileged accounts they have. And sometimes they think about it being the role, or simply just it's the domain administrator account, and that's the only one. But there's so much more. You have to think about the non-human accounts, such as machine accounts or IoT devices, or even application accounts and credentials. You have to look at service accounts. They're really those accounts that keep organizations, the automation running in the background, things like robotic process automation or API integration. So we have to look beyond those, and even getting to automation, simple automation, such as batch jobs and scheduled tasks and so forth. That's simply that just allow things to be running in a kind of typical schedule. These are things we have to consider as also privilege as well. It's not to say that they're all equal, but they do have some type of risk if they ever do get compromised. And these are used by different departments within the organization, whether it being the administrative team or the security team is looking to do vulnerability scans or patch systems. You might have help desk workers who's looking to log into systems and do troubleshooting, or even third-party vendors who might need to manage specific applications that you've outsourced or given permission to service providers. So really kind of looking at the complete landscape of privileges. And we're getting to the point where for many organizations, almost all identities should be considered privileged. And it doesn't mean that they're the same risk. They all have different risks, but we all must treat them as privileged, and we must make sure that we put the right security controls in place to reduce those risks. And unfortunately for many of these, as I mentioned, sometimes it's only a password that's protecting them. And one of the failures we have as organizations and security researchers and experts is that we leave humans to making those decisions of passwords. We rely on people making very wise choices about what is a strong password. So we need to make sure that passwords are done not the only security control. We need to move them into the background as much as possible. We need to automate the creation, automate the complexity, and allow people just to use them. They don't necessarily need to remember them or create them. There's systems in place, there's technology that can help remove that cyber fatigue, that password pain, and help let the solutions do it for you. Let's help move passwords into the background so employees can focus on the things that really matter. Focus on the efficiency and being successful at their job, so that security is not something that is seen as friction or causes them challenges or prevents them from getting access to the things that they should be authorized to do so. So what can we do to reduce these risks? What can we do to make organizations more resilient? One of the things I look at is one of my jobs is to make sure that we can force attackers to take more risks, force them to redo their techniques more often. The more risks that attackers take is the more chance that we have, the more noise that they make. And the more noise that the attackers make is the more chance that we have at being able to detect them much earlier. A lot of cases when I deal with incident response and I go through the logs do have a lot of evidence that the attackers were actually, going to cause havoc, or they were doing something suspicious or malicious. So we have to make sure that we bring that to visibility, we bring it more to the surface, and allow defenders having a chance to prevent attackers from causing a havoc within organizations. So this is some of my best practices and tips to help you get on the path and reduce the risks to your organizations. So first thing is, it's all about privileged access management. When you think about what is the new perimeter itself is identities. And what is the security? The security of identities is privileged access. And it's those combinations. It's really the bringing of those together that really helps organizations get a much better visibility and much better control, whether it being on-premise or in the cloud or SaaS-based applications or endpoints. This combination really allows you to get back in control, have that visibility, and put the right security controls in place to reduce those risks. And it's all about controlling that access, about controlling the authorization, and together it creates enabling interoperability. I think of privileged access security as almost being the conductor of an orchestra, making sure that things can communicate and everything's in harmony and symphony to working together, making sure that people can access things that matter, have that visibility. And privileged access is really that crucial component within organizations. So how do you get started? The first thing you need to be doing is thinking about what is the definition of privileged access or privileged accounts to your organization. Every organization has some type of uniqueness, some kind of different processes or different ways of doing things. So it's really important that you do have a good, strong definition of what privileged access is. And whether that being humans, whether it being people typing in credentials and passwords to log into systems. It could be systems themselves. It could be default credentials or accounts. It could be in operating systems. It could be in applications. It could be services. So really having a good segregation and definition whether it being based in hardware or software, whether it being on your premise in traditional environments, or even in cloud applications, whether it being AWS or Azure or IBM Cloud or Google Cloud, wherever it might be, getting a good understanding of also the location. Who also uses them? How did they get used? What security controls are in place? Are these department specific? Are they only being used by HR or sales? What's the sensitivity? What's the risk assessment of the data? And if that account ever gets compromised? And also identifying the service and system owners. Who's accountable? Who has the best visibility at determining whether it's being abused or not? So having that good definition at the beginning will help you get a good start into having a good strategy and plan about how you can deploy and get in control of privileged access. I also recommend at this stage, at this early stage, you also segregate and separate that definition into being what is system or non-human types of credentials and passwords, whether it being service accounts or whether it being automation or scheduled tasks and stuff like that. What is those system accounts? And then also what is the human interactive credentials that people need to type in? So there is very differences in how you can manage and secure them. Where system credentials can have as much complexity as possible. You can also have a more defined, clear definition of a life cycle, what rotation after usage, what additional security controls you want to put in place, as well as some behavior analytics into when it's typical or common the way credentials get used, whether it being time of day or location and so forth. But I do recommend at this early phase to have that segregation between system or automation or non-human accounts and the human interactive ones, the ones that we type in. Because it allows you to have that visibility and allows you to also make it much more, let's say, human friendly. You can make those policies much easier for people to interact with. And that's one of the big differences here. So get a really good starting point in having that segregation. The next thing you really want to get into is having a good life cycle, an automation or a good system. A system is where you have that consistency, that predictability, the ability to go through and have that definition. And then once you've got the definition, let's go and discover what's out there. Let's get that reality check. Let's get you finding all the privileged accounts that's in the environment through basically local administrator accounts to firewall accounts to network infrastructure to servers to endpoints to cloud-based, SaaS-based applications. Find all those privileged access because the more visibility you have, it's important that, if you don't know it's there, you can't protect it. So having that discovery is an important part of making sure you can put the right security controls in place, manage it, get the visibility, and then based on the risk, you can determine what security controls you need to put in place. And then getting into that consistent monitoring, understanding the usage, and then being able to have a process to be able to actually determine or analyze potential abnormal usage. When account is being used at 10 p.m. on a Saturday evening, is that something that's expected? Whether somebody on their system is running basically reg edit or ps exec at certain times of the day, is that normal usage in your environment? So really trying to identify and bring those to the surface. As I mentioned, not detecting abnormal usage is really bringing potential things to the surface that you have visibility, that you can investigate and carry out an understanding about. Is this expected? Was it something that was maybe just didn't follow the right processes? But really get that visibility, and that allows you to really respond to real incidents. Getting it integrated into your incident response plan is another really important area. And then this is not something, it's a checkbox. You want to continually review, audit, and have this as a continuous process. Have it as something that makes you have consistent security, having the ability to have good visibility and auditability, that you can actually tailor and make this much more effective, much more human friendly. So it actually, it does the job for the business. It helps move those password pain to the background. It helps take away the cyber fatigue from your employees. It helps them be successful at being able to access things when they need to, and actually prevent malicious attackers from getting access and abusing those systems. So really, this is a really important area to make sure you have a good life cycle and a system in place. The next thing I recommend having is some type of risk matrix. I talk about the PAM coverage. And this is really important because, as I mentioned, it's always continuous. And you want to make sure that you have the process of identifying what is my high risk accounts. Is it my domain administrator? Do I need to protect that much more than my local administrator accounts? Do I need to protect that much more than, for example, my social media accounts or my financial accounts or the HR databases or customer databases? What is the risks of all of those if they ever get compromised? Can my business continue if you lose access to your social media account? Or can your business continue if you lose access to your customer database? What is the biggest impact there? What is the business dependent on? So really having a risk classification, and that really allows you to determine when you discover new accounts or when new applications get registered or new basically, assessments are done. It helps you move those into the right areas of basically what security controls, what visibility do you need to have in there to reduce the risk as much as possible. For very highly sensitive accounts, you might want to do session launching so that the person doesn't know the credential. They just get access and all the security happens in the background. You might record that activity, and that actually prevents even internal employees from abusing their privileges. One common thing that we see very often is actually insiders abusing their privileges, sometimes to get the job done, and sometimes for financial profit. So we want to make sure we actually make that as discourage it as much as possible, and session recording will help you do that. And also things like multi-factor authentication. You want to verify, you want to continuously verify users and access to your systems. And that's a great way to be able to get into that zero trust or a framework or zero trust model. So really applying the right security controls to the right level of accounts and sensitivity, and this helps you get into that continuous process. And this is something I highly recommend all organizations at least have as part of that registration or classification process. The next thing is I always talk about, it's all about asking the right questions. It's about understanding about what your priorities are, what your goals are, what you measure as success, what you're trying to reduce the risk of as well. So this is really about the PAM checklist itself. This is the core element of making sure that you have a model to maturity. You have a path to getting as much value as possible. So this is about asking the right questions about which accounts, what is the risk? Are you worried about ransomware? Is ransomware what you want to reduce the risk of? Then let's look at some of those high risk accounts, such as domain accounts. Who interacts with them? It might be your IT administrators and security team. It might be the help desk workers. What are they doing? They might be doing configuration changes or administrative tasks. They might be creating or deleting or modifying users or installing software or updating security or patches. So really getting into what are the use cases that those individuals are using it for. Where are they located? Is it part of servers? Is it on-premise? Is it cloud or hardware? How do they get used? Is it human interactively logging in through an RDP session? Is it something that's doing automation from an application password? Is it part of basically a developer's DevOps environment that might have even hard-coded credentials? How do you make sure you remove the risks of those? And then what security controls are in place to protect them? This is another area this is where you really want to enhance and automate and make sure you put the right controls in place. So the Privileged Access Management Checklist is really there to help guide you, to help you identify what questions you should be asking in order to get the most success out of your investment in privileged access security. So definitely I do recommend this as being a core element of your path to success. And let's think about this in a reality. Let's look at it in a real kind of use case. And I think we also have to look at security as being adaptive. Security needs to be working for your organization. It needs to almost be like a living organism within the business. That when the threats are high, you can make sure that you actually tune up the security so it can do more verification, more controls as possible. And when the threats are low, you can also reduce that so it actually is much more effective and much more user-friendly. You want to create that balance. You want to find the balance between usability and making sure that employees are being productive, at the same time enjoying that security is actually helping them do their job. Because that's ultimately what we need to get to, is making sure that security is actually the better than the alternative of doing something potentially risky. So here we think about, you might have a trusted insider, and the person needs to be accessing critical systems, maybe a database administrator, it might be a developer, might be a HR person, it might even be an application. So ultimately, that's going to be tied to devices. It might be a BYOD device that they use to access. You might have a corporate laptop that's managed and has additional security controls in place. But they're really linked between that digital identity. That identity is that perimeter. That's how you associate those devices to this particular user or access request. So this person might need to access an internal database, or they might need to access a SaaS application, or even some cloud services. And as they make that request into the environment, that comes into a privileged access vault, where all of those credentials are protected and segregated from that user's authentication or traditional Active Directory account per se. Next thing is we'll go back and say, well, we want to verify that you really are who you say you are. And you'll do something like a continuous verification. You might, all of a sudden identify that it's the same request. You might do multi-factor authentication to verify and you make sure that it really is the person who say. You might do a session workflow or session access workflow. You might say that, we need your peer to review this, or you might need to check it out. Or you might already have, if it's a help desk worker, you might already have to have a service desk ticket that is associated to this request, and it might be time-based. So really making sure all those security controls are being satisfied before that access is granted. And ultimately then, basically, this will then provide them that authorization. They've done the authentication, we've verified who the person is, that they should have access to these systems, and therefore privileged access will then provide the authorization into the systems to make sure they have the access that they've been granted and in order for them to do their job. And this also might be out to external cloud systems as well. So making sure you have full control and visibility over a hybrid environment. You might even have multiple clouds. So this really gives you that visibility and auditability to making sure you know who this trusted insider is, you know when they're accessing, you know what security controls have been satisfied, and you know how long they've had that access to those accounts for. And potentially, if it is sensitive accounts, you might even record that activity. So this ultimately means if the attacker ever attempts to abuse a human through social engineering, or they even try to do a 0-day, or try to gain access to a particular application or system on a person's device, that means that even if they get the credential of that person, they cannot abuse it to laterally move into further in the network. They would ultimately have to take more risks, to take more chances. And by taking more risks, that again brings it to the surface and gives us the visibility that something malicious is happening. So this is all about classifying trust dynamically, getting into adaptive security where basically it works for you. And based on the threats, you can tweak it to be more aggressive or less aggressive to find that right balance between usable security and protecting the business from attacks. Ultimately, I'd like to think of this as a continuous digital polygraph test for access. So I always kind of think about when you have authorized requests coming in, you ask the right questions, those questions get satisfied from the controls, and therefore access is granted. When you ask the questions and the questions are not being satisfied, and it potentially is being abused by attacker, therefore you can prevent that access right at the beginning. So privileged access security is like a digital polygraph test for access to your organizations, both on-premise and in cloud or multiple clouds. So really make sure that this is kind of how I make that association or comparison. And so ultimately getting to the point where privileged access management is so much more than just being a password vault. Many organizations sometimes get stuck at just doing password management or password rotation, but privileged access gives you so much more. So make sure that you actually do the right investments. Make sure you take this privileged access management checklist and actually try to make sure that you actually get on the path to maturity so you actually can get as much value, integration, interoperability, orchestration into your environment as possible so that actually ultimately will be a return on investment. It's one of the few solutions out there that actually empowers happy employees. It's one of the few solutions that actually does have a real return on investment. When you think about what is the most valuable thing in this world, it's our time. And any solution that actually gives me back time, that saves time, that eliminates wasted time, is a very valuable solution. And privileged access management helps you do that. It helps reduce wasted time, gives you time back to do the things that's more important, more valuable for the business. So let privileged access take away password pain, let it do much more automation, and make sure that only the authorized employees can gain access to the systems to allow the business to function. And think about my job is no longer, it's not about security these days. It's about reducing the risk. That's ultimately what we're here to do. We're here to make sure that we understand what is the risk to the business and try to reduce it as much as possible. Try to identify where the risks are, if certain systems are down or unavailable, what does that mean financially to the business? What does it mean to the employees being successful? What does it mean to the risk to data in the organization? So ultimately our job is, while my skill set and background is cybersecurity, that's where my skills are. But I have to listen more to the business. I have to listen to what the business is trying to achieve, what their actual goals are, what success look like for the employees, and using my skills to help reduce that risk, to help create the fine balance between having security and productivity. It's not just about technology. It's not just about people. It's about the balance between all of those together, people, processes, and technology, and finding how to fine tune it to get the optimum balance to make it work for the business. This is really where security can be an investment. It can be something of value to the organization. It can actually increase in innovation and help actually accelerate some of the new deployments and some of the new technologies in the organization. So it's, for me, this is a really important area. And think about some of the areas that I'm always talking about is if you understand hacker techniques and the processes, how they gain access, you should always be assuming breach. And ultimately, understanding those techniques and processes is the best way to defend. That helps you get to actually understanding about what controls you need to put in place to make it as difficult as possible to force them to take more risks, create more noise, giving you a chance at detecting them. But it's focusing on the business risks that really allows you to get the security budget to make that investment. And it's really important to also think about the human element of it, making security where it's usable. There's no room in this world for complexity. We no longer have that, that luxury anymore. Today, we have to think about usability. We have to think about security that adds value as quickly as possible and as much as possible to the business. So ultimately, to help you get there, to really take you on this journey, I've taken this and I've actually created a template, a guide, a self-assessment tool for you. So you can download the Privileged Access Management Checklist, and this will allow you to go through asking the real important questions, making sure you have a good definition of what privileged access is for your business. What areas or what phased approach do you want to actually deploy first? What is the highest critical risk to your business? Is it third-party access? Is it development environments? Is it employees with local administrator rights? Is it access to databases or your backup environment or your employee information or the financial database or your intellectual property or your legal documents? What is the most sensitive areas of your business? And then making sure you actually increase and add real security controls that really makes the difference between an organization becoming a victim of a cyber attack and being successful at actually becoming more resilient. This checklist is your guide to PAM maturity and success. I hope this has been valuable. My name is Joseph Carson, Chief Security Scientist at Thycotic, and I really hope you enjoyed the event, and I hope this is something that will help you get kickstarted on the right path and get as much value as possible. I hope it's been educational. Thank you for your time. Take care and stay safe out there.
All right. Thank you so much, Joseph. Really appreciate that. What an incredible presentation, just chock full of really amazing security advice there. Again, thank you to Thycotic and Joseph. Great presentation. We've run out of time for live Q&A, but we are taking your questions electronically, so keep those questions coming in, and I'm routing those over to Joseph. I've just brought up the poll question on the screen that says, what additional information would you like about the Thycotic solution? And we would appreciate your response to the poll. It's now time for our next Amazon $500 gift card announcement. We've got an Amazon $500 gift card going to Catherine Milne from Georgia. Congratulations, Catherine Milne from Georgia. Still another $500 gift card to give out, and don't forget about our best question prizes as well for 6 Amazon $50 gift cards. We're getting a lot of great feedback on Joseph's presentation. A great session. Made me rethink a few things. Thank you. Christopher says, we love Secret Server from Thycotic. And Catherine says, woohoo. Congratulations to Catherine and all of our prize winners. I hope that everyone will stick with us through the end of the event, because there's another gift card to come and 2 more really excellent presentations coming up. If you haven't answered the poll question that's on the screen, we appreciate your feedback there. I'll leave it up for another moment, and then we'll move on to our next presentation. All right, thank you to everyone who responded there to the poll. It's now time for our next presentation on the Ecocast. Welcome, Mr. Jeff Whitaker, Senior Product Marketing Manager for Cloud Data Services at NetApp. Jeff, take it away.
All right, thanks, David. Appreciate it. So one thing I wanted to start off this discussion just to let everybody know, like, who is NetApp, and what are we doing? Talking about tools for Microsoft environments in the on-premise and in the cloud. So NetApp you may not know this, or you may know this already, but NetApp has long time been a storage company, but really focused today on we are a cloud-led, data-centric software company where we do a lot of different services and a lot of different capabilities that help deliver value to your data environments, whether you're in the cloud or whether you're in the data center. And our strategy is about applying our rich storage data-centric software innovation, to help our customers thrive in this hybrid cloud world. So whether you're moving environments into one cloud or multiple clouds, or have data centers and cloud environments, being able to solve those challenges so that you can be successful across any one of those. This is what we call our data fabric, where we focus on bringing the simplicity and flexibility of the cloud to the enterprise data center, and then also bringing those enterprise data services to the public cloud. And just to touch on, we have a number of different services. I'm focused heavily on the cloud side of what we do, and the different services, the different solutions that we offer in each of the three cloud providers, from Microsoft Azure, Google Cloud, and Amazon Web Services. So really, it's about delivering both storage environments. So if you see on the left here, services that we call Azure NetApp Files, Cloud Volumes ONTAP, Cloud Volumes Service. So these are very much storage-centric services that help your solution environments as you're making that deployment, or you're making that migration into one of the cloud providers. And then also going into some of the other capabilities that once you have environments there and you need to do stuff with these, being able to protect your data with a service we offer called Cloud Backup. And then optimizing. One of the big things with the cloud environments is it very easy to create sprawl in your infrastructure when cloud resources are so easy to come by. So being able to put tools in there to help you optimize your resource allocation or your resource utilization. We have caching tools, Global File Cache, which I'll touch upon in a little bit here, and then cloud tiering services. So if you have environments that you want to tier off to lower cost storage, and then the tools such as our Cloud Sync tool, which is there to really help you replicate and move data itself. Then Classify, Cloud Compliance is a product that we have, which is actually about taking a look at everything that you do from data perspective and making sure that you know where it is, how it's utilized, meeting those regulatory requirements with your data sets. And then analyzing data, when it comes to an environment and you have deployments out there across vast locations, whether it's data center or the cloud, how's it being utilized? Are you utilizing your resources effectively? Being able to monitor and analyze that, and then also bringing security on top of that too, so that you can make sure that your data is secure at any point in time, wherever it is located. And then the development side of things, really going after the container side of new applications developments with a project Astra, which really works on making sure that the data is married correctly and efficiently to your actual container deployments. And this is broad. This is talking about everything, not specific to your Microsoft environment. So I wanted to get into a couple of very specific use cases on the Microsoft side of things that will help you kind of understand some of the things that you can do when you're dealing with your Microsoft applications or your Microsoft environments, your file services, your shares, those different types of data environments. So first off, really about the acceleration model when it comes to moving to cloud. Accelerating your Microsoft environment migrations into whichever cloud you're choosing. In this case, one of the big struggles that we've seen with our customers is that when it comes to files in the cloud, there is an expectation that your application environments have, or just kind of your management of your infrastructure itself, when it comes to file services, that you have come to expect in the data center, that when you're making that move into the cloud, it's stuff that you want to make sure is there as well. So enterprises are really searching for easy ways to deploy file workloads in the cloud, but they don't want to sacrifice performance, reliability, and some of the data management capabilities that have been come to expect in the data center itself. So there's no way to do a lot of this without some of the re-architecting scenarios that are often happen in some environments, but some environments don't even allow you to re-architect. So how do you make this move into the cloud and utilize some of the tools that you already have been developing for years, or environments that applications that you've been running for years, moving those into the cloud, taking advantage of the capabilities and the flexibility there, but not becoming a bottleneck from the data side. One note that I want to say here too is up in the right-hand corner, you will see a QR code. That QR code will take you to more information about this section that I'm talking about. I have it here. I have it on my second use case that I'll talk to a little bit, but just wanted to make sure if you want to kind of go through here, you want to listen to what I'm talking about, you want to gather more information, this QR code is here, and then I'll touch upon them at the end just so you get a quick chance to jump there. Much easier than trying to memorize a URL, that's for sure. When it comes to files in the cloud, in this context, I'm talking about Azure. We do have services that play across Azure, Google, and AWS, as I mentioned, but I'm just going to use Azure as the example here. But when you're migrating, making sure that you have the tools that are out there to make that migration of your Windows environments successful. So we deliver the widest choice of file protocols. We do Linux environments as well, but in this case, getting those SMB3 or the Windows file share services into the public cloud and delivering it with enterprise class availability and performance, and then giving you multiple tiers from a price standpoint and a performance standpoint so that you can make the choice on what file services to use in the cloud, but yet pay for what makes the most sense for your application. And then really it's about those management features and the functions on top of that. So stuff that NetApp has been doing for decades in the data center, bringing those tools from zero footprint, efficient snapshot technology. In the cloud, you got to pay for every bit and every byte. So making sure we bring those tools along that allow you to be more efficient. Cloning, replication, all of those at the storage layer, so you don't have to build it into your application environments. And then also giving you an Azure consistent experience. One of the things you'll note here, NetApp is in the name of this product, but this is not a NetApp product. This is actually a Microsoft product. So you're going to go into the Microsoft Azure environment. You will find Azure NetApp Files. It's a Microsoft service, but we actually helped build this service on NetApp technology. So really a way to bring some of the enterprise capabilities into the cloud, but yet utilize it and manage it, deploy it, do everything from a very cloud specific format. And then we play in a number of different use cases here as well, but really it's about helping you migrate your enterprise Windows environments into Azure. Some of the challenges that we really focus on here, as we've heard from customers, is about a couple of key areas when moving to the cloud. What kind of tools are really needed? What do the tools provide you as you're making these migrations happen? And it's really around reducing risk, lowering cost, and saving time. I think those are pretty prominent for just about any IT infrastructure environment or any IT environment from that standpoint. But really getting the availability targets that you've come to expect in the data center and doing it without data loss. Lowering costs, putting some of those efficiency tools in there to manage your data better, utilize less data than you have in kind of avoiding some of the sprawl scenarios. But also, the performance of the environment allows you to be more efficient. If you think about compute, storage, and network as the three key pillars for any application performance environment, if the storage is the slow point, a lot of times we see inefficiencies in the other areas because people are trying to make up for those limitations. So that's where this service, Azure NetApp Files, comes in and delivers substantial performance to really remove that bottleneck. And then also saving time. Being able to integrate the backups in those tools, our snapshot technologies, and the way that we are efficient with those, we're also very fast. So when it comes to, and I'll touch upon in a moment here, but when it comes to some of these capabilities, it's about delivering this and delivering it quickly and reducing the amount of time that it takes for you to deal with backups and recovery points in your environments. So from a file services standpoint, you'll see I have Linux and Windows on here, but Windows is really the focus. But really, as you deploy those application environments, being able to choose a performance level, being able to choose the piece that you need for your individual applications, and doing it in a very consistent way that you've come to expect from your Windows applications when you were in the data centers as well. So very simple to manage. So as I said, you get that Azure experience. You get that on-premise like performance. So depending on what your application needs are, you could have just a basic application that doesn't have really much performance requirement, but you don't want to lose that data. So you have a tool out there, you can choose one of the lower performance tiers, but yet you have those capabilities built in so that you can protect your data sets in case of something bad going on. We hear about that stuff in the news all the time where data is getting lost, people are getting in and corrupting or whatever the scenarios are in those ransomware situations, but really damaging data. So being able to put some tools in there that allow you to protect against some of this. And then also bringing in the efficiency pieces. So all of those things that you want to see on your data, seeing it in the Windows file environments as well, and delivering that across the board from low performance application requirements all the way up to extreme, very high performance application needs. And one of those examples is around the SQL Server environment. You know, one of the things when it comes to a database, if you're moving a database into Azure, the expectation there is often response time based, right? We want to be able to get a response, you know, whether it's a transactional application that's happening or a user interface type application or a web application, whatever's using SQL Server on the back end, being able to get the speed to from an access standpoint, a lot of that relies upon the data side of things. You know, we have all kinds of compute options in the cloud, but being able to utilize those compute options, but then also have very fast response times on the storage side really makes for a better user experience, or makes even some of these applications that you didn't think you could move to the cloud, makes them a reality now for you. So as you're looking at your different environments, looking at the performance side of things, I will say that, you know, Azure NetApp Files delivers on-prem like performance. So when it comes to these items, making sure that if you know you want to move some things and you don't think that you can, some of these scenarios like the database environments, now the doors are open there where you can get very fast response times on top of very highly available infrastructure, high reliability numbers, efficiency tools, all those things which I mentioned before on being able to protect an IT or an enterprise type environment. You now can start looking at these, you know, depending on, even if this is very core to your business infrastructure, moving these into Azure as well, or moving these into the cloud as well as a whole. But again, similar type of scenario, you on the right here, you can see, choose the data performance levels that match your requirements, and then be able to get some of those continuous availability shares so that you know that if something does happen, you have access to those. You can bring up your environment without losing data. So very, very important tools that we've built in the data center environment. Those are available inside of the Windows file share environment for deployments like SQL Server. And just as a note, when I'm talking about time or I'm talking about efficiency, you know, we've seen on some database environments, this is actually a customer metric where they've seen 60 times faster database backups when utilizing the Azure NetApp Files environment versus using the database backup model itself, right? So it's one of those that when I'm talking about efficiency and time, this is substantial. I mean, if you can back up your data extremely quickly, you can now have, maybe you could only do 5 backups a day before. Now you can do maybe 100, right? So it's one of those where if something does happen, you minimize the risk and you minimize the impact on your business. So that was more of the general accelerating, kind of helping you look at Windows environments and migrate those into the cloud. So this is a secondary scenario here where we know a lot of businesses that have a lot of Windows file servers scattered amongst their infrastructure. So in this case, it's really about how do you address that multiple distributed file shares across your entire corporate environment, global environments often, where you don't want to have a bunch of Windows servers sitting underneath desks. Let's take those from those edge points and now move them back into the cloud and share the resources across all the regions that are out there that you need them from a cloud perspective, reducing the server and storage footprint, eliminating backups, you know, kind of modernizing your infrastructure and modernizing your experience by doing a more consolidated distributed file server environment. Again, I'll back up real quick here. One thing, I do have the QR codes. This is another QR code that talks specifically about this distributed Windows file server environments across the cloud. And in this case, I'm using Google as the example. So I used Azure as the example before, but just want to emphasize that we do Google, we do Microsoft Azure, and we do AWS. So I wanted to highlight, in this case, we have a service called Cloud Volume Service, which is the storage component, the storage service that is deployed in Google that allows you to have access to the file environment. So some of the things that I mentioned before in the Azure NetApp Files environment that's very specific to Microsoft, this one is the Google's version of something very similar. So very fast SMB or fast Windows managed file service specifically for Google, and then bringing those multiple tiers, flexible storage, very easy to deploy in a very Google-centric deployment model. So you look and feel like you're deploying any type of storage in Google as well. So it's not something that you're learning new. But in this case, we're talking about using Google for a Windows file share environment. So if you're utilizing Google in those scenarios, making sure that you have that access to your Windows file shares as well. So NetApp has a service called the Global File Cache, and this one is really about real-time intelligent global file sharing for those distributed workloads. So being able to connect this together across all the regions within your provider to share these and distribute these around, and utilizing a file service on the back end, in this case, Cloud Volume Service on the back end, to be the share location. The software provides virtual file share and intelligent file caching at each location without a protocol change. And it enables high performance global file sharing in collaboration with real-time distributed file locking. So you get the file locking capabilities, but because you're distributed, you now have a cache point closest to where your users are utilizing the file environments. So some of the benefits here of using Global File Cache with Cloud Volume Service: flexible and scalable. You get that global file consolidation, and it scales to hundreds of different sites and thousands of users. So if you're talking about small environments, you're talking about large environments, we can address a lot of these. And if you think about some of those scenarios where you may have store sample boxes underneath desks in different locations, we know that Microsoft has issued end of support on those platforms. So here's a way to actually look at solving some of those challenges of file distribution, Windows file distribution across your infrastructure. It's secure, so consolidating that data is encrypted as standard in there, reducing costs because now you're only caching data at the endpoints. You're not having separate copies of this at endpoints. So the data is at a central point, and it allows you to be more intelligent about your data management as well, because now you have centralized data management, and the cache points are where the data is like delivered from a performance perspective, instead of having to be addressing backups at all these locations and having to deal with files that are out of sync with files in a different location. So an improved user experience as well. And then from an availability standpoint, making sure you meet some of that storage availability. In the Google case, we're talking about 3 nines of availability. In some of the other services, we see different numbers there, which I mentioned in a little bit earlier. But really, it's about doing that and then having the tools on top of it to make sure that you meet your data retention and your recovery objectives as well. And some of the big ones here are around consolidating the distributed file systems. So this is, as I mentioned before, this is what we're talking about, is getting those Windows file servers and consolidating them, but then also dealing with things such as faster migrations, simplifying deployments, but getting the same user experience that you've come to expect in your cloud provider environment. The storage itself looks and feels, it's a Google user experience, and then being able to distribute that with the global file cache, and then modernizing to a more managed service. So getting away from having a box under a desk or having a hand-built file server in the cloud. And trust me, I've seen a lot of these, which is kind of like, in my mind, defeats the purpose of moving to the cloud. But I guess if the services aren't there, you got to do it somehow. And in this case, you can now use Cloud Volume Service for Google, or Azure NetApp Files and the Azure environments. Those scenarios. We also have other tools called Cloud Volumes ONTAP, which runs across all platforms. So there's some of these that you can utilize as the file service environment to sit behind your global file cache for distribution. What does an environment look like? From a Windows Server architecture standpoint, you've got a load balancer here on the left. You've got your Windows virtual machine here in the middle, where you're talking to your applications, but then your applications are talking off to, I guess it's a little bit hard to see some of the arrows here, but talking to the actual Active Directory server, and depending on if it's one of the services provided by like Google in this case, or if it's one that you utilize in a separate location. But then that is what kind of manages your whole Cloud Volume Service deployment, where you actually can tie that into your Active Directory. So all of your Windows virtual machines can have access to those shares, whether it's data, whether it's logs, whether it's just general file shares, but this is what a typical architecture looks like. So with that, I did talk about two specific scenarios there from a use case standpoint. And I just wanted to wrap this up. NetApp is delivering services for your Windows environments, really to help that journey to the cloud. We utilize our proven ONTAP technology, which is the basis for a lot of the platforms that actually it is the basis of the platforms that we've been doing for the last 25, 27 years. And then deploying applications. We're talking about Windows here, but there's so many more things that we can do when you have access to a broad range of file service environments, from SAP to high performance computing because it's so fast, but then also bringing in the backup and DR capabilities to support that. So if you want to accelerate that migration into the cloud, or you want to solve some of these file distribution scenarios and do it in an optimized way, take a look. As I said, I've got the two links here on the bottom again, so hit these QR codes and you can gather more information on accelerating migrations in Azure, or the Windows File Server consolidation scenario that I showed with Google. Hit on one of these things and it'll take you can go learn a little bit more about each of these scenarios, or just go to netapp.com/cloud and you will see kind of the whole portfolio that I showed at the very beginning there, and see all the different things that we can do for you across your Windows environments and more. So with that, thank you guys. I think there's some questions out there, Dave.
Absolutely. Yeah. Great presentation, Jeff. I really enjoyed that. I also love the QR codes. I tried those out myself. So those are cool. Thank you for sharing those. We do have some questions for you from the audience. Let's see. First one here that came in, they're asking, how many sites should one have for the consolidation in the cloud to make sense?
Yeah, one we've seen this from a number of different customers. Really, it's pretty small, minimal. So it's like if you have 5 sites, consolidating that into the cloud is fine. If you have less than that, then it's one of those where it's like, you have a couple of things. It may not be quite as valuable to you. But if you have 5 sites or more, and as I said, we can scale up to hundreds. A lot of the customers that we work with, are in those 20, 30, 150, right? That type of scenario. But also we do have that. So if you have 5 sites or more, it's definitely a good opportunity to go look at consolidating into the cloud.
Okay, excellent. And then next question, for the file environments, they're asking, is this only for Windows?
No, so from a file share perspective, we have a number of different protocols that we support, and Windows is one of the prominent ones because across the board, file services came late to the game in the cloud. And we know this, where even if we go back to AWS specifically, it was object and disk, but there was no file services for a long time. So we've been doing this for both Linux and Windows environments. And in this case, we brought all of that along. So we support Windows file shares, we support Linux file shares, and we support multiple Linux file shares. So we can actually support legacy applications. So if you have applications that are relying on NFS3, which is older, and a lot of people are deploying with 4.1 now, but some of those applications rely upon it. So we do across the board there, we support Linux and Windows. And on top of that, we support Linux and Windows on the same shares. So if you want to access a share from a Windows box and someone else wants to access that share from a Linux box, or you say virtual machine, then you can do that as well. So something that's been very beneficial across the board for our customers.
Very nice. And then let's see, next question. Are these services only available in Google and Azure?
Yeah, so we do have services that play across Azure, Google, and AWS. In the case of Azure NetApp Files, because that's a Microsoft service, that is only available in Microsoft. And then we have I would say, in a way, a similar type architecture where we have file services on top of NetApp technology, and that's the Cloud Volume Service that is offered in both Google and AWS. And then we have a software service called Cloud Volumes ONTAP, and that's basically like a virtual NetApp device running on top of it's a software solution that's running on top of cloud services. So you choose disk, you choose compute from the cloud, and you run basically a virtual NetApp environment. That one is across all three providers, and we do both single instances as well as high availability instances, and that gives you the true look and feel of a NetApp environment. So if you have NetApp in the data center, that's something that you can just extend right into the cloud and create a really good hybrid environment with the Cloud Volumes ONTAP platform, because it looks and feels just like the platforms you've worked with in the data center.
Very cool. Well, I'm afraid that's all the time we have here in our live Q&A, but I really appreciate the presentation, Jeff. Thank you so much for being on the event.
All right, thank you.
For more information on NetApp, of course, visit netapp.com/cloud and check out the QR codes there on the screen.
All right, I've brought up our poll question that says, what additional information would you like about the NetApp solution? And I'll leave that up here for a moment, let everyone respond to that. Thank you for all the excellent questions that are coming in. I am routing those over to Jeff and the experts at NetApp. We do appreciate those. And so I'll leave the poll up here for a few moments and let everyone respond to that. And then I'll move on to our final presenter on today's Ecocast. All right, thank you to everyone who responded there to the poll. If you haven't got your response in yet, now's the time to do it, because we are moving on to our next presentation. I'm excited now to introduce Mr. Chris Papp, Senior Solutions Marketing Manager at Nutanix. Chris, are you there?
Yes, I am. Thank you.
It's great to have you on, Chris. Take it away.
Absolutely. Well, thank you. Thank you for the introduction. It's been some great presentations so far. I was excited to be able to listen to them and getting my chance to come up and talk about SQL Server and Nutanix and Era. So the official title of what we're talking about today is Microsoft SQL Server Simplified Performance, Security, Availability with Cloud Agnostic Database as a Service. So that's a very long way to say, like, how can you get SQL Server to run how you want it, wherever you want to run it, in a hybrid cloud, public cloud, or on-premises, right? So let's talk about the things in the SQL Server challenges that happen in the environment when we're talking to customers first, before we talk about why somebody would want to run it with Nutanix and the benefits of it. And so, when we look at the major challenges facing customers today in database world, most of the issues are in these four areas that we're looking at. And when looking at modernization of a database estate, we often focus on the complexity and agility, but we also need to look at lowering the risk and improving costs. And what we mean by that is the risk can be costly outages if it's not set up correctly, right? It could be database could be as fast as possible, but if it's not available, it doesn't help anybody. But then on the flip side of that equation is database administrators are always on the firing line, right? They tend to be a smaller group in the IT organization. And they're pulled in a lot of different directions, especially as data is proliferating. There's more data in the databases. The databases are, you have database sprawl, much like you had VM sprawl back in the day, and you still have today. So they have a lot more operational work to do. And then you have the accidental DBAs, the guys that just happen to know the most about the database. They know the most about setting up or backing up a SQL Server, but they're not dedicated to that. They might be a systems administrator. So they're pulled in a lot of different directions. So there's a lot of risk involved when you're looking at it from that direction. And then from, like, the cost is also from, the high cost of trying to keep up with growth, right? It's the CapEx cost, purchasing out to 5 years. Like, can you scale it out? And if you can't, it's forklift upgrades. It's also the operational cost. the cost of having your team spinning their tires and putting out fires instead of working on line of business projects that can move the company forward. So there's a lot of different challenges, and they're all unique. And these are the things that we're seeing specifically with SQL Server and in your traditional legacy environments. So, kind of the answer to that, like the antithesis to a traditional infrastructure environment that's complex and hard to manage, when you're looking at that and what that does is, the reason it's hard to manage is a lot of the things that are spent and the time spent from the team is specialized skills, careful integration, purpose-built systems. So what we mean by that is like, you have a different environment for each project because you're trying to dedicate that have a dedicated silo so you don't step on other resources that are needed for that tier one application set. You might have different database vendors, so you keep them separated out in different teams. So it's not a wash, rinse, repeat. You can't leverage, one environment that's being underutilized for this other environment that's being overutilized. And then, that's a lot of the effort that's put into it. It's just very exhausting, to rub salt into the wound, if you will. Like, routine upgrades are time consuming, and, they require immense attention to detail, and they're disruptive to the business operations, which is why they are often performed during the weekends, right? And so before you know it, it's time for a refresh, and so your team is burned out. And then the remaining time, that 20%, is on apps and services. When probably it should be the other way around. You should probably spend more time on the apps and services. So, just the point of this being is that legacy environment, that legacy way of building out a database environment, infrastructure environment for SQL Server, is root cause for a lot of the issues that we run into today and a lot of problems that we're seeing. And so, one of the things that we want to get to is, what does it mean to go web scale? Like, why is it important for Nutanix to build out a web scale architecture that was built from the ground up? And, why does that matter? How is that different from traditional environment? And one of those is that, from being a leader in hyperconverged infrastructure, those problems that we were pointing out earlier don't exist. Like, you don't have the siloed infrastructure. That hyperconvergence has, that just by the pure nature of how it works, very localized I/O for performance. You're not running over the wire. If you have a database sitting on a VM, and that VM is trying to pull data, you're not going over the wire to pull that data. It's actually staying local. So the infrastructure is smart enough to any data that's local to that database is going to be on that node that it sits on. The other portion of that is because we're very software defined, any updates to performance or how ingesting large data sets are software updates. Think of just like how a Tesla can take an update and get faster. We've actually done that in a couple of the latest updates to the underlying architecture and operating system have been software updates where it makes it faster and easier to ingest large data sets and to spread that and scale it out. And because we are a distributed autonomous system, those bottlenecks and those that we have with workloads are eliminated. And then the biggest thing out of that too is one of the biggest things out of that is that when you're using the architecture that we have, there's not that need to kind of scale out or pre-plan up to 3 to 5 year purchasing cycles, so you're over provisioning and having a lot of large capex that's sitting there, just unnecessary hardware and software that's that was a cost to you, and then as you grow your environment out, now you have to do a forklift upgrade to replace it. We can linearly scale out as needed. Just same thing. Think of public cloud consumption. What's made that easy? We're bringing that to an on-premise data center. So if all you need is a small environment that has 10 databases, when you start out as a small company and you've grown up to where you have 1,000, you're purchasing as needed and you're scaling out. Think of Lego blocks that are added on. There's no forklift upgrade. And as new technology comes out, you're getting that new technology from hardware perspective, and then you're getting that new technology from software updates as well. And we've tested this with SQL Server. We've had an outside agency, ESG, did a performance analysis, and they started out with a single database instance of SQL Server and then scaled it out. They added 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I think they got up to about 20 instances. And what they found was that performance, there was never a ceiling that's hit, like what you run into, like a SAN storage that starts filling up. There's a ceiling that's hit, and performance, and you got to replace it and get more capacity in the next version. No, as they added more nodes into the environment, average storage read latency was less than a millisecond, and the average write latency was 1.59 milliseconds. So there's consistent SQL Server performance. And as it's distributed, right, and just that cloud scale. So the more you added and the more you grew, that means as your company is utilizing it more and they're scaling, pulling in more databases, we're able to keep up with that demand from a performance standpoint. It's very important. The flip side of the equation is, okay, we've taken care of the infrastructure. What about all the work that's on the back end? And kind of like the analogy here, like when you see an iceberg, you only see 10% of it, 90% is underwater. It was the same thing is true when running a database, right? Like that infrastructure is one portion, but there's a lot going on behind the scenes. And if you've ever been in that situation where if you were another team and you asked for a database instance, if you were the DevOps team asking, and it takes a week to happen, well, there's a lot going on with that, and there's a lot of teams involved from that, the storage team, systems team, DBA, there's the compliance and security. A lot of times, especially with database operations, they tend to lag in terms of automation, simplicity. There's a lot of manual effort, a lot of human error with that. So there's not a lot of wash, rinse, repeat work being done. And because of that, there's a lot of human error involved, so a lot of troubleshooting that happens. So database as a service kind of starts to eliminate these things. And this is just a small list that we're looking at right here. There's a lot more work involved, but there's so much more than just infrastructure. Like, this is why your database admins and engineers are overworked and spinning their wheels on troubleshooting. And the answer to that from our side is providing database as a service functionality that's specifically made for running databases on Nutanix. Think of it as customized database as a service on premises or, hybrid cloud. So it's hybrid cloud database as a service. And it's the whole premises of it is to take all that complexity and all that manual operations and make it very simple. Make it easy to deploy and have a central control plane, whether you're running, SQL Server and just like most environments, they might have a mix of like, open source or, Oracle, or you're going to have different databases, so you can all see it from a central control plane. Also, the benefits of seeing it from a central control plane is you know what your infrastructure looks like, you know what your database operations are looking like, you know where the errors are, you know what needs to be fixed. So it's, green is good, red is bad type of situation. Yellow is a warning, right? So you're able to see that, kind of manage that fairly simply and focus on other operations in the environment, like projects. And so the product that we have in our environment, we refer to our database as services era. And there's, 4 key pillars that we work on with that. That's provisioning. So that's, the ability to automate and, take a complex hybrid cloud deployment, for instance, of an always-on availability group and deploy that, in minutes or, if you have multiple nodes, as little as an hour versus days or weeks. Lifecycle management to us is the patching and keeping that environment up. So, what gets the most press, is when an enterprise is owned by, by a security hack, and some of the most notorious ones have been databases that have been hacked because they're accessing customer data and stealing it. In some of those instances, those companies were in a patch cycle. They were trying to get to it, but it was time consuming. All the applications have to go down. There's multiple teams involved. They have to test it. Sometimes they can't get to them all in time. So by the next patch cycle, they're not done with the previous one. We're able to manage it. So we're able to easily identify all the servers, what versions of patch cycle they are, kind of make that uniform and automated, and deploy those out to one or many. And then ability for copy data management. What we do with that is cloning and snapshots. Very unique to us and how we do that. Because we're built on Nutanix HCI, we're able to plug into those APIs and then take these space-efficient, time-efficient snapshots and clones that are point in time. So they could be terabytes the size databases, but they're a fraction of the size. And so we're able to save up to like 60% of storage on copies of databases. And that's important because in a study that was done not too long ago, for every one production database in the environment, in large enterprises, there was 10 copies of that production environment. And the average enterprise out of these 1,000 customers that were surveyed had about 100 production databases. So, at that point in time, when you look at about 1,000 databases on average in an environment, it's a lot of expensive storage being used for your dev and test environments in production. So we're able to reduce the amount of storage that's used without taking a performance penalty and without taking any type of penalty on storage. And you're able to have multiples of those. And then with that, you're able to keep the environment up and unique. So your dev and test is matching your production, right? So there's not differences in data sets in there. So especially for like a reporting purposes, companies that used to take, maybe a overnight pull and copy the data and move it to their reporting service so they can report on. Now they're doing it with more up-to-date data because they're not taking a performance penalty, and they're taking copies of that now hourly, right? So the data is up to date. And then last but not least, especially not least important, is database protection. We're able to take with those clones and snapshots, take backups, and then do in-place restores if somebody blows a table or there's a corruption there. We're able to get that back. And that's important because, again, you're not taking a performance impact. If you have a SQL Server that is having a lot of changes and you're used to a daily backup, there's a lot of data loss that can happen. But what we have with companies now, because there's no side effect of having multiple backups, they're taking hourly backups, or sometimes in some cases we have customers that have set it up to 15 minutes. So their loss of data is less, right? They're able to recover to the more recent time. And so they're up and running with little effect on the business. So very important. So that's what we do from an Era side. And then we also, integrate with other services that we have, like object storage, block level, file services, microsegmentation, and we work across multiple database engines. And as of currently, we're able to, if you deploy Nutanix on AWS, we're working on Azure as well. So that was made public recently. So now in those types of environments, you can actually run databases in the public cloud and on premises and manage them with Era. And so that means you have the same control plane, same policies, and same management capabilities on public and private cloud. So huge benefit of running that. Kind of talked about a lot of different things. I kind of want to map it out, what we do from definitely from an architecture standpoint, but from whole platform standpoint. So when we're running databases, we can run all the supported database engines on the same web scale platform. The distributed data and management planes are designed for scalability. And then we cater for failure with no single, we cater to avoid failure with no single point failure. So we're also able to, with Database as a Service, provide automated services to simplify database operations across provisioning, patching, upgrades, cloning, and database and refresh. And then, and that's all from a central control plane. And then you're able to run it anywhere you want. And the whole point of that is that freedom to choose. A lot of times we find that customers, have a lot of times they do have a public cloud plan, but because of data gravity or issues with like compliance or just something that just won't move to the public cloud, or it doesn't make sense for it to move to public cloud for one reason or another, they're going to have a mixed environment. They're going to have the new default is hybrid cloud environments, and you can manage that. So however it fits your business, Nutanix can do that as well. Sometimes the plan is to keep it in a hybrid cloud environment where you can run your primary SQL Server on premises and then run your failovers in an availability zone in AWS, right, as an optional failover. That is something for that will protect against failures and high availability and site outages. So when we talk about the existing process of what we do, it's unpredictable, multiple steps and teams. I give the example of deploying a database, and when it comes in, here's all the steps that are involved. I talked about, like the infrastructure team, storage team, networking team, backup team. A lot of friction in that process, very time consuming. It's not at the speed of business. If you needed it that day, you're definitely not going to get that database that day. It increases time to market, right, and what that deliverable is. When you look at once you simplify that with Nutanix Era, request comes in, takes minutes. It's standardized. It's best practices each time. Because it's not taking a week and there's not a lot of operations involved. It's very fast, and so again, reduces time to market, and increases innovation rate because now you're not sitting there waiting and wasting teams' times. Let's extend that out further. Like, what if we include this in like a CI/CD pipeline integration? You can have something like ServiceNow. The request comes in, and if it comes in from a team that you allow permission, say a DevOps team, you're going to allow them to set up databases that are t-shirt size and deploy them out. That request will come in, and the API setting will go out to Era, and it can now deploy that out with best practices. So now you're just eliminating one more process in that and having to come for somebody to kick it off. If you have a team that's deploying and for test and dev, and they're going to need a certain size database, and you're going to give them permissions to do it. Once they put the request in, it can come through and it can validate who it's from, and it can provision, clone, configure, and it's all set up for best practices because now you set up this golden way of how it's deployed. And so each of these aren't an individual snowflake of a database that's going out. Each of these are standardized, so you have less troubleshooting. It's all on the same, patch level. It's all following compliance and security, standards that you have set out. So it's taking it one step further and avoiding any delays. So it simplifies it greatly. The last slide I kind of want to go through in terms of what we do. This is an example, just a very simplified example of how we've had a recent customer set us up where they had a on-premises, was in Phoenix, was their data center, their colo, and they had their standby in the data center, so a high availability cluster there. And then as part of the availability group in AWS Frankfurt, they had a replication copy over there, and then a replica that was all managed by Era, so they didn't have to jump into a different management console. They were able to all set it up and set it up per their security compliances and per their best practices, all from the same console, and set it up. And at the end of the day, we're setting it up. We're not making changes. We're not doing something instead of SQL Server doing it. We're just integrating with how SQL Server replicates. We're just deploying it out there for them. And we're plugging into the APIs for SQL Server. So we're not doing the replication for them. We're just managing it and giving visibility into the environment. There's a lot of benefits for running Era for databases, but when you look at it, there's we've done TCO studies that are out there that give real numbers and like return on investments, and it's ridiculous numbers like 291% ROI. But I think the key things that we show in like the Forrester TCO study that we did was like how much time the DBAs and system administrators were getting back. An example that's in there was we were able to cut off hours workload usage up to 50%. So that's huge. They were doing 100 hours a month in off hours work just in maintenance upgrades, and by being able to cut that by just simplifying and setting everything up means a lot, right? So it meant that they were able to spend less hours, off hours, troubleshooting, and then more time during working hours working on projects. So huge resource right there. Leveraging it. If you're interested in going and checking out what we do, we have a test drive. So it's nutanix.com/test-era, or you can go to the Era website and click on it from there. And you actually kick the tires and you go through the different provisioning, patching, and updating that's available to you through Era. And it's kind of a choose your own adventure. Select the case that you want to do, and you kind of walk through, and it'll help said where to click, and you can get a feel for it and see if it's something that would work in your environment. So I encourage you to go out there and check that out. So I think there's some questions if we want to take those next.
Absolutely, yeah. Great presentation, Chris. We do have some questions. Let's see. While we do that, we've got a few poll questions here for everyone out there in the audience. First question is, where are you currently running your Microsoft SQL Server databases? And I'll share the results of this here in just a moment as soon as we get enough folks to respond. So let's see, Chris, first question I wanted to ask you is, can Nutanix support database engines other than Microsoft SQL Server?
Yes, absolutely. Obviously Oracle, Postgres. We just announced support for MongoDB. There's MariaDB. And so, I think there's like SAP HANA as well. So definitely across the board, the major databases we support other than SQL Server.
Excellent. And then next question, they're wanting to know, they say data security is a major issue these days. Can running Microsoft SQL Server with Nutanix help in some way with security?
Yes, and there's two ways to look at that. There's the way of if there's a critical vulnerability that's identified. As I spoke to earlier, you can look in your environment and see who's missing that patch or that critical vulnerability. Or if it's a zero-day exploit, obviously all of them are going to need it. But it gives you like a deployment train method of being able to test it, that patch in a testing environment, and then determining how you want to roll it out one to many, one at a time, or a certain group of servers before you move up to, maybe you hit your tier 2, tier 3, tier 2, and then tier 1. There's also the other option of within Nutanix is the ability to, from a security standpoint, we support data sanitization. So in other words, like while you're deploying a server, if you're taking a clone of it or you need a copy of it, but you don't need all that, the social security numbers, maybe HIPAA data related things, inside the deployment, we can set up scripts to sanitize that data, so there's not copies of data outside where it should be. And then the third area is the ability to microsegment. So with Nutanix, you can microsegment your databases to isolate them in environments. So one case is like if you do have a security exploit, you want to segment off that database until you patch it. You can definitely do that with Nutanix, and it's a simple set of rules, and then unsegment as needed. But we definitely have those capabilities.
Excellent. And let me share the results of this poll with everyone. Looks like 74% said they're currently running their SQL Server databases on-prem or in private cloud, 18% hybrid cloud, 7% public cloud only. And then I've just brought up the next poll for everyone that says, over the next 2 years, how do you expect your Microsoft SQL Server database deployments to change? So you indicated where they're running now. Where do you see them going in the future? So let's move on to our next question. They're asking, to use Nutanix Era, do I need Nutanix running on premises like a Nutanix cluster, or is this a SaaS solution, or how does that work?
Yeah, so in order to run Era on our database as a service, it requires the underlying Nutanix hyperconverged infrastructure. So it won't run, you can't mix it with other types of infrastructure it needs to. And that's how it takes advantage of those 0-byte clones and those highly efficient snapshots, because we plug right into the Nutanix APIs for storage, distributed storage. When you're running it in a public cloud, there's an option, like with AWS, for instance, to run Nutanix on bare metal AWS servers. And so then it becomes you're extending out your Nutanix environment out to AWS. And so that gives us the ability to manage it then. At this point in time, we don't have the capability to manage, for instance, SQL servers sitting on EC2 in databases because they're not sitting on Nutanix. But keep an eye out. There might be some changes coming up in the near future.
Excellent. And then another question here, Bradford is asking, during patch management, what about potential for downtime there? Is there some way to mitigate that?
Yes, there is. So normally, if you're doing patch management, you want to take advantage of like the cluster capabilities if you do have a cluster set up. So before you patch a server, just like best practices, because if you're managing or maintaining anything in the environment, maybe move the working instance to a different node at that point. But if it's a single instance database that's by itself, that's standalone, Nutanix, when we're doing an update for ourselves, we don't always require downtime. We can fail stuff over. So if it was an AOS update, which is our operating system that runs our HCI, we can keep your environment from going down, and we'll just fail between physical nodes, and everything still stays up. But if it's a security vulnerability patch or some sort of like Microsoft SQL update that does require a reboot and you're a standalone and you can't get around that, it's still going to reboot. But obviously what we do at that point is in an availability group, you just fail over to the other node before you reboot.
Okay, excellent. And then let me share the results of this next poll with everyone. And 49% say moving more into on-prem and private cloud. 46% say moving more into hybrid cloud. So almost a 50-50 split there. 4% say moving more into public cloud. And then final poll question here, that is just what additional information would you like on the Nutanix Era solution? And I'll leave that up here while we continue our Q&A. A couple of folks, Michael and Bradford, are asking if you can share any hint as to the release date for Azure support.
So we made the announcement at Microsoft Ignite, the most recent Microsoft Ignite. And so we're at like a release candidate now. I think we have some specific customers working on it. What I can tell you is I think what we're kind of announcing to customers that are interested in it is possibly end of year. So that's the best I can give. Okay.
Thank you for that. Another question here, Patricia is asking or saying that they have a database backup solution already in place. If they were to move databases into Nutanix Era, could they continue to use the same database backup solution?
Absolutely. Like what we mean for a database backup is we're not trying to take away the ability to archive. And it's very important if you have a strategy in place for database backup, continue to use that strategy, because that means like in your tiered strategy, you want to get that data off-site, right? If part of it's replicating out to the cloud, or you're doing the traditional like backup to another server, and from that other server you're backing it up on the traditional tape format and then getting that out of your environment in case there's a site outage or a disaster scenario. We don't want that. What this gives you the ability to do is instead of having to go back to tape and going back through the archive or pulling it from a remote location, the systems administrator or DBA, because they're taking these snapshots, backups, and they're not taking up much room. If something happens or something with too many permissions, or they're overzealous on the keyboard and they deleted an important table, instead of having to go to that, you have something that was from 15 minutes ago or an hour ago, and you can then do like an in-place restore of that table. So it gives you another option to kind of efficiently get it up quickly. But we don't want to replace your archiving and backup strategy. We just want to kind of supplement it.
Okay. Good clarification there. Daniel, he's got like 5 different questions in here. So I know we answered the one about supporting other, existing backup tools. Another question he's asking is, if we were to protect our databases with Nutanix Time Machine, and we did a clone or a snapshot, where is that data going?
So what you can do today, so that's actually a really excellent question. To clarify, why that's important is because if you're backing that data up or you're taking a snapshot clone and it's sitting on the existing, database server and it goes down, that does you no good if you can't get to it, right? If there's some sort of disaster scenario. So you always want your backup someplace, like if that goes down, where's it at? And the fact that you can have, if you have an environment with multiple clusters, meaning not SQL clusters, but we call them multiple nodes put together in a high available format for Nutanix a cluster. If you have maybe different data centers, East Coast, West Coast, for instance, for sake of explanation, and you have Nutanix in both of them, you can take those clones and snapshots, and if you're in the West Coast, and keep them and have them sitting over in the East Coast, right? So they do not have to live in the existing environment. Same is true as if you happen to be a customer that's running Nutanix on AWS, you take a snapshot and clone, you can now replicate that over to on-premises or vice versa, from on-premises to AWS.
Nice. Very nice. Let's see, another question here. What about cost savings? Could this help to reduce overall costs by moving to Nutanix Era?
Yes, and Nutanix Era does a couple things. So one way is just by being on a Nutanix platform. There's the ability to consolidate and eliminate a lot of database silos, and just by the infrastructure that I kind of went over before. So we have a lot of customers when they move to us and they're doing a database modernization effort. They're just able to reduce the sheer amount of databases they're running because they didn't have to silo out the environment. They're able to run it all in Nutanix without this kind of segmented areas. So that's one way. The other way with Era specifically is the fact that when you're taking those copies and you're running them for reporting or for copies of production into dev and test, instead of eating up all that storage, if they're terabyte-sized databases or hundreds of gigs, for instance, you don't have to for every copy of that. And if you go to the example I gave of 10 copies for every production database, that size scales out enormously. But we're able to save a minimum 6x, right, in storage by taking clones and snapshots the way we do with no performance penalty. So that alone in like tier 1 high performing storage saves a lot because you wouldn't be able to do that in traditional SAN infrastructure. So by using us to manage those copies of the databases, then you're saving on a lot of expensive storage. So that's a capital cost that's saved. And then from another side of it, it's just the OpEx, right? Like how much time are you wasting walking in the morning and putting out fires, right? And so there's that, versus like, being able to answer the call of business when they need something and deploy it immediately. There's that cost as well.
6x. I really like that. That's a big number, big savings there. So, all right. Well, Chris, I'm afraid we're running out of time here in our live Q&A. There's some more technical questions. We'll forward over to you electronically. But excellent presentation. Thank you so much for being on the Ecocast today.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thanks to Nutanix for supporting the Ecocast. Of course, visit nutanix.com/era for more information, and also check out the handouts tab there as well for a solution brief on Nutanix Era and also all the other solutions that you've learned about on the Ecocast today. I want to make sure that you check out the handouts tab before you go. There are some special trial links and everything that are in there, so it's an excellent resource. And I'll leave up the poll question for anyone to answer who hasn't yet responded while I announce our final Amazon $500 gift card. This is going out to Mark Boone from California. Congratulations, Mark Boone from California. We will reach out to all the prize winners via email, and we'll also be reaching out to the best question prize winners as well after the event. We appreciate all the excellent questions on the event today. And then finally, I want to remind everyone, make sure that you check out the 10 on Tech podcast over in the iTunes store for the latest and greatest on enterprise tech. If you are a potential sponsor of an upcoming Megacast or Ecocast event, reach out to us at connect@actualtechmedia.com, and we would love to chat about having you on the show. And then finally, we talked a fair amount about ransomware on the event today, but if you're interested in ransomware, and I'm afraid to say it, who isn't interested in ransomware today with all the ransomware attacks? You don't want to miss our Megacast that's happening next week on ransomware recovery, best practices, and products. We're going to have 9 different presentations on that event today or next week from security awareness solutions, data protection, disaster recovery, rapid recovery, all sorts of really cool cutting-edge ransomware recovery and ransomware education solutions presented on that Megacast. So hope to see you there, happening next Thursday, 1 week from tomorrow. I hope that you learned a lot today on the Ecocast. I know that I did, and we will see you next time. Have a great day. Bye-bye.